when a wedding planner at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay grabbed a tall man by the arm and told him he was not allowed inside, all because he was wearing golden white sneakers to a black tie. Wedding, she had no idea she had just kicked out one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Steph Curry, number 30, four-time NBA champion, the greatest shooter in basketball history. And he didn't argue. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, put his hands in his pockets, and walked away. But here's what makes this story hit different. He wasn't crashing the wedding. The groom had invited him, personally, with a handwritten letter that took 12 tries to get right. A letter that told the story of a broke kid from East Oakland who slept on a pull-out couch with broken springs and shot baskets every night in shoes that had holes in the toes. A kid who saved every dollar from a grocery store job for 4 months just to buy his first real pair of basketball shoes, the Curry Force, because the man on the poster above his bed made him believe his life could be bigger than his apartment. Steph read that letter, and he said yes. He told the groom he would be there. The groom kept it a secret for 3 months, didn't tell his bride, didn't tell his parents, didn't tell his best man. He wanted it to be the greatest surprise of his life. And then his hero showed up and got turned away at the gate. The groom stood at the altar with no idea. He said his vows, he kissed his wife, he checked his phone during cocktail hour and found nothing. No messages, no missed calls. Just a blank screen and a sinking feeling that the man on his childhood poster had forgotten about him. But Steph Curry had not forgotten. He was outside, sitting in his car, waiting, and he was carrying something in his jacket pocket, an envelope that had nothing to do with basketball that was about to change this groom's family in a way nobody in that room could have seen. Coming, what was in that envelope brought 200 people to tears at the same time. It put a grown man on his knees in the middle of a dance floor. And it gave two parents who had worked their entire lives something they never thought they would have. Stay with me until the end of this video because what happens in that ballroom is something you will not forget. It starts with a wedding planner, a pair of sneakers, and the biggest mistake of her career. The wedding was perfect. Every little detail was exactly right. White roses lined both sides of the aisle. The Pacific Ocean sparkled like a million tiny diamonds behind the altar. 200 guests sat in beautiful wooden chairs wrapped in ivory silk ribbons. A string quartet played music so soft and sweet it floated through the salty evening air like a dream. It was October 14, 2023, a Saturday. The sun was melting into the ocean, turning the whole sky orange and pink. The Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, California, one of the most beautiful wedding spots in the entire state, had never looked more magical, and Priya Anand was making sure it stayed that way. Priya was the wedding planner. She stood near the entrance gate with a clipboard pressed against her chest and eyes sharper than a hawk. She wore a black dress and black heels. Her earpiece buzzed every few minutes with updates from her team. She had planned over 300 weddings in her career. Big ones, expensive ones. She knew every trick, every problem, every disaster that could ruin a bride's special day. And she knew how to stop trouble before it even started. That's why her eyes locked on the man the second he appeared. He was tall, very tall, maybe 6'2". He walked toward the ceremony with a smooth, easy stride, like someone who was used to having people watch him move. He wore a beautiful navy blue suit. The fabric looked expensive. His white shirt was perfectly pressed. His tie sat straight, but Priya's gaze traveled downward, past the suit jacket, past the tailored pants, all the way down to his feet, and her stomach dropped. Sneakers, not dress shoes, not loafers, not even nice boots. Sneakers, bright, flashy, gold and white basketball shoes that practically glowed against the gray stone pathway. They were so shiny they almost looked like they had been dipped in sunlight. Priya moved fast, 3 quick steps, and she stood directly in the man's path. She held up one hand like a crossing guard. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Her voice was polite but firm as steel. "This is a black tie event. I'm afraid those shoes do not meet the dress code." The man stopped walking. He looked down at Priya. She barely reached his shoulder and smiled. It was a warm, easy kind of smile, the kind that made you feel like you had known him your whole life. "Oh, I totally understand," he said. His voice was calm and friendly. "But I actually know the groom. He invited me himself." Priya didn't blink. She had heard this exact line at least 100 times before. Every single wedding had at least one person who knew the groom or was old friends with the bride. It never worked on Priya. "Sir, I appreciate that," she said, but the couple was very clear. Black tie dress code. No exceptions. "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside until you have proper footwear." The man looked down at his shoes again. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff out his chest or demand to speak to someone else. He just nodded slowly, almost like he respected her for doing her job. "Fair enough," he said quietly. Then he turned around. He put his hands in his pockets, and he walked back through the gate without another word. Priya exhaled, crisis handled. She picked up her clipboard and made a small check mark next to gate security. That's when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around. It was her assistant, Davi Okafor. He was 24 years old, fresh out of event management school, and right now his face was the color of old paper. White. Completely white, he whispered. What? She said. Do you know who that was? Priya frowned. Someone who didn't read the invitation card. Davy swallowed so hard she could hear it. That was Steph Curry. The clipboard slipped from Priya's fingers. It hit the stone ground with a sharp clap that echoed through the evening air. Two nearby guests turned to look. Priya stared at Davi. Steph Curry, she repeated. The words felt strange in her mouth, like they couldn't possibly be true. Stephen Curry, number 30, Golden State Warriors, four-time NBA champion, the greatest shooter in basketball history. Davi's voice was getting higher with every word. You just kicked Steph Curry out of a wedding, Priya. Priya's hand went to her mouth. She turned back toward the gate. The pathway was empty. The tall man in the navy suit and the golden sneakers was gone, disappeared into the California evening like he had never been there at all. Behind her, the string quartet started a new song. Guests shifted in their chairs. The ceremony was about to begin. And Priya Anand, the woman who had handled 300 weddings without a single mistake, had just made the biggest one of her career. But she didn't know the worst part yet. Nobody did. Because the groom hadn't just casually invited Steph Curry. This wasn't a celebrity showing up for fun. There was a story behind that invitation, a story that started in a tiny apartment in East Oakland with a boy who had holes in his shoes and a poster on his wall. And tonight, that story was supposed to have its perfect ending. Instead, the hero of the story was walking away. But to understand why it mattered more than almost anything else that would happen tonight, you need to know the groom. His name was Marco Delgado Singh. He was 31 years old. He had dark brown eyes, a jawline his bride said could cut glass, and a laugh so loud it could fill a whole room. Tonight he stood at the altar in a charcoal black tuxedo with a white rose pinned to his chest. He looked like a man who had everything, but Marco had not always had everything. In fact, for most of his life, Marco had almost nothing. He grew up in a small apartment in East Oakland, California. And when people say small, they usually mean cozy. This apartment was not cozy. It was 3 rooms, a kitchen the size of a closet, one bedroom for his parents, and a living room where Marco slept on a pull-out couch with springs that poked through the mattress like tiny metal fingers. The apartment sat just a few miles from the Chase Center, the arena where the Golden State Warriors play basketball. On quiet nights, Marco swore he could almost hear the crowd cheering. He would lie on that lumpy couch and close his eyes and pretend he was there. His father, Ruben Delgado, worked 2 jobs. During the day, he drove a delivery truck across the Bay Area. His back ached every single night. During the evenings, he cleaned office buildings downtown, vacuuming floors and scrubbing toilets in fancy companies where people made more money in 1 week than Ruben made in a whole year. His mother, Sunita Singh Delgado, worked at a laundromat 6 days a week. She spent her days folding other people's clothes, pressing other people's shirts, and smiling at customers even when her feet were so swollen she could barely stand. She always smelled like fabric softener, even on Sundays, her only day off. The smell stayed on her skin like a second layer. They were good people, proud people. They never asked anyone for help. They never complained. They just worked and worked and worked so their son could have a better life. But money was always tight. Not sometimes tight, always tight. There were weeks when dinner was rice and beans 5 nights in a row. There were months when the electricity got shut off because the bill was $14 short. There were winters when Marco wore the same jacket from the year before, even though his arms stuck out past the sleeves. But Marco had one thing that made all of it bearable: basketball. Every single day after school, Marco would walk 8 blocks to the Brookfield Recreation Center in East Oakland. The courts there were cracked, the nets were ripped. Half the time, one of the rims was bent sideways from older kids hanging on it. The lines on the ground were so faded, you had to guess where the three-point line was. None of that mattered to Marco. He would shoot baskets for hours, until the streetlights buzzed on, until his fingers were raw, until his mother called his name from 3 blocks away, and he could hear her voice echoing off the buildings like a song. He didn't have nice shoes. The ones he wore had holes in the toes. The soles were so thin he could feel every crack in the concrete right through the rubber. When it rained, his socks got soaked in seconds. He would stuff newspaper inside the shoes before bed, hoping they would dry by morning. They never fully dried. But he played anyway, every single day, rain or shine, tired or hungry, happy or sad. Basketball was the one place where Marco didn't feel poor. On that court, with a ball in his hands, he felt free. And on the wall of his tiny living room, right above the pull-out couch with the broken springs, Marco had one poster, just one. It wasn't a movie poster or a music poster or a poster of a fast car. It was Steph Curry, number 30, the Golden State Warriors. The skinny kid from Charlotte, North Carolina, who nobody believed in, and who became the greatest shooter the game of basketball had ever seen. Wardell Stephen Curry II. Marco didn't just like Steph Curry the way most fans like a player. He didn't just wear his jersey or cheer when he scored. Marco studied him. He watched every single game, even the ones that started late on school nights. He would turn the volume down low so his parents wouldn't wake up and press his face close to the small TV screen. He watched how Steph moved without the ball, how he came off screens, how he planted his feet and flicked his wrist on every three-pointer. That quick release, so fast it looked like a magic trick. Marco would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and copy that shooting form. Elbow, eyes on the rim, follow through with the wrist like you're reaching into a cookie jar on a high shelf. He read every interview Steph ever gave. He watched every documentary. He knew that Steph had been overlooked too, that big college programs didn't recruit him because he was too small, too skinny, not strong enough. Steph went to Davidson College, a tiny school in North Carolina that nobody paid attention to, and from there, he changed basketball forever. That story, the story of the kid nobody believed in, became Marco's oxygen. When Steph won his first NBA championship in 2015, Marco sat on his pull-out couch and cried. He was 15 years old. His father found him with tears running down his face and thought something was wrong. "I'm fine, Papa," Marco said. "He did it. He actually did it." Ruben looked at the TV. He looked at his son. He didn't fully understand, but he sat down on the couch and he put his arm around Marco and they watched the celebration together. When Steph won the 2022 NBA Finals MVP, dropping 31 points in Game 6 against the Boston Celtics at TD Garden to clinch the Warriors' fourth championship, Marco screamed so loud his neighbors knocked on the wall. He was 26 years old by then. He had his own job, his own apartment, but in that moment, he was 15 again, sitting on that couch, watching his hero prove the whole world wrong. Again, Steph Curry wasn't just a basketball player to Marco. He was proof. Proof that a kid who wasn't the tallest or the strongest or the most gifted could still be the best. Proof that hard work and faith and a stubborn refusal to quit could beat anything life threw at you. Steph Curry was the reason Marco believed he could be more. And Marco did become more. He never made it to the NBA. That dream faded by high school when he realized he was good at basketball, but not that good. Not Steph Curry good. Not even close. But basketball taught him things that mattered more than making the league. It taught him discipline. It taught him how to work with a team. It taught him how to get knocked down and stand back up without feeling sorry for himself. It taught him that practice and patience could close any gap. He earned a scholarship to San Jose State University, not for basketball, but for academics. His grades were that good. He studied mechanical engineering. He graduated near the top of his class. He got a job at a technology company in San Francisco that designed parts for electric vehicles, and along the way, he met Alara Johanssons. Alara was a kindergarten teacher from Daly City. She had blonde hair she always wore in a messy bun, a laugh even louder than Marco's, and a heart so big it barely fit inside her chest. She loved kids, rainy mornings, and terrible puns. Their first date was at a taco truck in the Mission District. Mark smelled salsa on his shirt within the first 5 minutes. "That's either very clumsy or very honest," Alara said. "Both," Marco answered. She laughed, and that was it, he knew. 3 years later, Marco proposed on the beach at Half Moon Bay, the same beach that was now glittering behind the altar where he stood in his tuxedo, waiting for his bride to walk toward him. Life was good. But Marco had a secret, a big one, something he had been hiding for 3 months, something he hadn't told Alara or his parents or Tommy Nakamura, his best friend and best man, something he hadn't whispered to a single living soul. 3 months before the wedding, Marco had written a letter, a handwritten letter. He had spent weeks figuring out how to get it to the right person. He had called phone numbers. He had searched the internet. He had written draft after draft, throwing each one away because the words didn't feel big enough. Finally, he sealed the letter in an envelope and sent it to two places: the Curry brand headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Golden State Warriors Community Relations Department at Chase Center in San Francisco. The letter was addressed to Steph Curry, and inside that letter, Marco had done something terrifying, something that felt like jumping off a cliff with no parachute. He had invited his childhood hero to his wedding. He didn't expect a reply. He told himself it was stupid, that Steph Curry received thousands of letters every single year, that a man who had dinner with presidents and movie stars was not going to show up at some random engineer's wedding in Half Moon Bay. But Marco sent it anyway, because the little boy who used to shoot baskets in torn shoes on cracked courts, that boy still lived inside Marco's chest, and that boy still believed in impossible things. 2 weeks later, Steph Curry said yes, and Marco decided to keep it a secret from everyone. It would be the greatest surprise of his life. The one story he would tell his children and his grandchildren, the night Steph Curry came to his wedding. But right now, at this very moment, while Marco stood at the altar and the string quartet played and 200 guests waited for the bride to appear, his hero was outside the gate, turned away, walking into the evening, because of a pair of sneakers, and Marco had no idea. He had no idea that while he straightened his tie and smiled at arriving guests and tried to calm the drumbeats of his own heart, the greatest surprise he had ever planned was falling apart just 200 feet away. But let's leave Marco at the altar for a moment. Let's talk about the shoes. Because those gold and white sneakers that Priya Anand saw, the ones that made her stomach drop, the ones that got Steph Curry escorted out of a wedding, those shoes were not random. They were not a fashion choice. They were not Steph being careless or disrespectful or lazy. Those shoes were a message. They were the Under Armour Curry 4 More Dimes edition, gold and white with a sleek, low-cut design that caught the light like jewelry. They had first released during the 2017-2018 NBA season, a season that ended with the Warriors sweeping the Cleveland Cavaliers to win their third championship in 4 years. Now, to understand why Steph Curry chose to wear those exact shoes to Marco's wedding, you need to understand something about Steph and sneakers. Back in 2013, Steph Curry was with Nike. He was young, he was talented, but Nike didn't see what was coming. There's a famous story, one that Steph himself has talked about publicly, where during a pitch meeting, a Nike executive accidentally called him Stefan instead of Stephen. They even showed him a PowerPoint presentation that still had Kevin Durant's name on it. They had forgotten to update the slides. Steph left Nike. He signed with Under Armour, a company that was mostly known for making workout gear, not basketball shoes. It was a gamble. A lot of people thought it was a mistake. Some people even laughed. Nobody was laughing anymore. By 2023, the Curry brand had become its own entire division within Under Armour. Steph had become one of the most important athletes in sneaker history. His shoes were worn by kids on playgrounds and professionals on courts all around the world. But the Curry Fours held a special place, not because they were the most popular or the most expensive, but because of the season they represented. That 2017-2018 season, the season of dominance, the season of joy, and it was the season that changed Marco's life. Marco was 17 that year. His family had just moved again, this time to an even smaller apartment because the rent on their old place went up by $200 a month. Marco no longer had a bedroom at all. He slept on a fold-out cot in the corner of the living room, behind a curtain his mother had hung from a tension rod to give him some privacy. That curtain was light blue with little white flowers on it. Marco hated it. He was 17. 17-year-old boys do not want a flower curtain as their bedroom wall. But he never said that to his mother because he saw how carefully she had ironed it before hanging it up. He saw how she had clipped it with clothespins so it wouldn't sag. She was trying to give him something that felt like his own space, even when there was no space to give. So Marco said, "It's perfect, Ma." And Sunita smiled. And that was that. Behind that curtain, on the wall above his cot, the Steph Curry poster still hung. It had moved with him from apartment to apartment, carefully rolled, carried in a cardboard tube, and retaped to every new wall. The edges were soft now. One corner was torn. But Steph's face was still clear, still smiling, still wearing the Warriors blue and gold. And below that poster, Marco made a decision. He got a job. It was a simple job. 3 days a week after school, plus Saturdays. He bagged groceries at a small corner store called Park Avenue Market on East 14th Street. The owner, an old Korean man named Mr. Yoon, paid him $8.50 an hour, which was actually below minimum wage, but Marco didn't know that at the time, and Mr. Yoon always let him take home bruised bananas and dented cans of soup, so it felt like a fair trade. Marco worked every shift he could get. He didn't spend a single dollar, not on candy, not on chips from the vending machine at school, not on the movies when his friends invited him. He said no to everything. "What are you saving for?" Tommy Nakamura asked him one afternoon at the Brookfield courts. "Something important," Marco said. "Like what? A car?" Marco laughed. "I'm 17, Tommy." "I can't afford a car." "Then what?" Marco didn't answer. He just dribbled the ball and shot a three from the faded line. It swished through the torn net. 4 months later, Marco had saved exactly $141. He walked into a Foot Locker at the Bayfair Center Mall in San Leandro. He walked past the Nikes, past the Jordans, past the Adidas wall. He went straight to the Under Armour section, and there they were, the Curry 4 More Dimes, gold and white, sitting on the shelf under a small spotlight like they were waiting for him. The price tag said $129.99. Marco picked them up. He turned them over in his hands. They were so light. The material was smooth and clean and perfect. They smelled like possibility, like something brand new, like a fresh start. He brought them to the register. The cashier, a teenager not much older than Marco, scanned them. $129.99. Plus tax, that's $141.18. Marco pulled out a wad of crumpled bills and a small Ziploc bag full of coins. He counted out every dollar, every quarter, every dime, every nickel. He was 19 cents over. Exactly enough. The cashier raised an eyebrow. "You've been saving up?" "4 months," Marco said. The cashier nodded slowly, like he understood something without Marcos having to explain it. "Respect, man," he said, and he put the shoes in the bag. Marco carried that bag home on the bus like it was made of glass. He sat with it on his lap, both arms wrapped around it, and didn't take his eyes off it for the entire ride. An old woman sitting across from him smiled. "Birthday present?" she asked. "Something like that," Marco said. When he got home, he went behind his flower curtain. He sat on the cot. He opened the box. He took out the left shoe first, then the right. He held them side by side. golden white. They almost seemed to glow in the dim light of the living room. Then he put them on. He stood up, and something happened. It wasn't magic. Marco didn't suddenly jump higher or run faster. His life didn't change in 1 second. Bills still needed to be paid. The apartment was still small. The curtain still had flowers on it. But Marco stood a little taller. His shoulders went back. His chin went up. Something shifted inside his chest, a small, warm thing, like a pilot light, clicking on inside a furnace that had been cold for a long time. He looked down at those shoes and he didn't see sneakers. He saw proof that he could earn something, that he could want something and work for it and hold it in his hands, that he wasn't just a kid behind a curtain. He was someone who could make things happen. He wore those shoes to the Brookfield courts the next day. Tommy's jaw dropped. Are those the Curry fours? Yeah. How did you? Wait, is that what you were saving for 4 months? Marco nodded. Tommy stared at the shoes. Then he stared at Marco. Then he shook his head slowly. You are insane, Tommy said. And I respect it so much. They played for 3 hours that afternoon. Marco made 14 three-pointers. A personal record. Every time he planted his feet and rose up for a shot, he felt those shoes gripping the court. No slipping, no sliding, no wet socks, no holes. Just solid ground beneath him. For the first time in his life, Marco felt like he was standing on something real. Now, here's the part that connects everything. Marco had written all of this in his letter to Steph. Every detail. The flower curtain, Mr. Yoon's store, the 4 months of saving, the bus ride home. The moment he stood up in those shoes and felt something unlock inside his chest, he wrote it all. And Steph Curry, a man who receives thousands of letters every year from fans all over the world, had read Marco's letter, not skimmed it, not passed it to an assistant. He had read every word, and it moved him. So when Steph showed up to the wedding that October evening, he wasn't wearing sneakers because he didn't own dress shoes. The man had a closet full of Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent. He was wearing the Curry 4 more dimes because of Marco's letter. Because Marco had told him those shoes changed his life. Because Steph wanted to walk into that wedding wearing the same shoes that made a 17-year-old boy from East Oakland stand a little taller. It was an honor, a tribute, a way of saying, I see you, Marco. I read your words, and they mattered, but Priya didn't know any of that. All Priya saw was sneakers at a black tie wedding, and now Steph was gone. He was standing somewhere outside the gates of the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay, alone on a sidewalk, watching the sun sink into the Pacific Ocean. One of the most famous athletes on earth, a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, had been turned away at the door and hadn't said a single word about who he was. He could have. Of course he could have. He could have said, I'm Steph Curry. He could have pulled out his phone and called someone. He could have made a scene. But that wasn't Steph. The same humility that had carried him from Davidson College to 4 NBA championships was the same humility that made him nod and walk away quietly when a wedding planner told him his shoes were wrong. Inside the gates, the ceremony was minutes away. The string quartet was tuning up for the processional. Guests were putting away their phones. Alara's father, Henrik, was holding his daughter's arm in the bridal suite, trying not to cry before they even reached the aisle. And Marco stood at the altar, his heart beating so fast he could hear it in his ears, sneaking one last glance at the entrance. Any minute now, he thought. He'll be here any minute. But something else was happening too, something much bigger than a surprise wedding guest. Something that had been set in motion weeks ago, quietly, secretly, by Steph himself after he read Marco's letter. Something that would not reveal itself until much later tonight. Something that would bring an entire room to its knees. And it had nothing to do with basketball. But that moment was still hours away. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the music. The string quartet changed songs. The soft background melody stopped. A new one began, Pachelbel's Canon in D. The notes rose into the salty air like birds lifting off the water. Every guest recognized it instantly. It was the signal. 200 people stood up from their chairs, and at the far end of the aisle, she appeared. Alara Johansson looked like she had been made from moonlight. Her dress was long and ivory white with delicate lace sleeves that stopped just past her elbows. A thin veil floated behind her like mist. She held a bouquet of white peonies and baby's breath, and her hands were trembling so hard the petals shivered. Her father, Henrik Johansson, stood beside her. Henrik was a quiet man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a thick Swedish accent he had never fully lost even after 30 years in California. He was a retired carpenter who had built bookshelves and kitchen tables with his bare hands his entire life. Those hands, rough, scarred, strong enough to split wood, now held his daughter's arm with a gentleness that made the guests in the front row look away because it was almost too tender to watch. Tears were already falling down Henrik's face. He didn't wipe them. He didn't try to hide them. He just walked one slow step at a time with his little girl, who wasn't so little anymore, toward the man she had chosen. Marco watched Alara come toward him and his chest ached. Not a bad ache. The kind of ache you feel when your heart gets too full and there isn't enough room inside your body to hold everything you're feeling. joy and gratitude and disbelief all pressing against his ribs at once. She was so beautiful, it almost didn't seem real. Tommy Nakamura stood beside Marco as best man. Tommy was trying very hard to keep it together. He had promised Marco he wouldn't cry. He was already failing. His bottom lip was doing that thing where it twitches right before the tears come, and he kept blinking fast and staring at the ocean like he was deeply fascinated by the waves. He was not fascinated by the waves. He was trying not to sob. Alara reached the altar. Henrik kissed her forehead. Then he turned to Marco and did something no one expected. He bowed. Not a deep, dramatic bow, a small one. A slight forward tilt of his silver head, a gesture of respect from a father to the man who was about to take care of his daughter. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. But Marco felt it in his bones. Take care of her, Henrik whispered. His accent made the words sound thick and heavy, like stones worn smooth by a river. With my whole life, Marco whispered back. Henrik nodded once. Then he walked to his seat in the front row, sat down next to his wife Margit, and covered his face with both hands. Margit put her arm around him and rubbed small circles on his back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Reverend Lucille Grant stood at the altar between Marco and Alara. Reverend Grant was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with deep brown skin, silver-rimmed glasses, and a voice so warm it could melt snow. She had been the pastor at a community church in Daly City for 22 years. Alara had gone to her Sunday school as a child. There was no one else either of them wanted to perform the ceremony. Beloved friends and family, Reverend Grant began. We are gathered here on this beautiful evening beside this ocean that has been here long before us and will be here long after to witness something sacred. She paused and smiled at Marco and Alara. Love is not a feeling, she continued. Feelings come and go like the tides behind me. Love is a decision, a promise, a daily choice to say, I see all of you, the beautiful parts and the broken parts, and I choose you anyway, every morning, every night, in the easy seasons and the hard ones. I choose you. Marco reached out and took Alara's hand. Her fingers were cold from nerves, but they wrapped around his instantly, like they had found exactly where they were supposed to be. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Alara went first. Her voice shook at the beginning, but grew as she went. Marco, she said, when I met you, I was 25 years old, and I thought I had my whole life figured out. I had my apartment and my classroom and my routines, and then you walked into that taco truck line and spilled salsa on your shirt within 5 minutes, and I thought, oh no, this is the one. This ridiculous salsa-covered man is the one. The guests laughed. Marco grinned. You showed me that plans are Alara continued, but the best things in life are the ones you didn't plan for. You are my favorite surprise, and this I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you were too clumsy to eat a taco properly. More laughter. Marco wiped his eyes. Then it was Marco's turn. He took a breath. Then another. He looked at Alara, and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face in the golden evening light. Alara, he finally said, I grew up thinking I had to earn everything, that nothing in life would be given to me for free, and that was mostly true, but then you came along. And your love, it wasn't something I had to earn. You just gave it to me, freely, completely, without conditions, and that changed me. He paused. His voice cracked. You didn't just give me love, Alara. You gave me permission to be loved. And I didn't know I needed that until you showed me. The silence that followed was total. Even the ocean seemed to go quiet. 200 people sat perfectly still. Several of them had given up on trying not to cry. Reverend Grant gently wiped her own eyes before continuing. The rings were exchanged, simple gold bands, nothing flashy. Marco's hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped Alara's ring, and Tommy had to steady his. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Grant said. Marco, you may kiss your bride. Marco kissed Alara, not a quick, polite peck, a real kiss. The kind that says this is the beginning of everything. The guests erupted, cheering, clapping, whistling. Tommy was openly crying now and no longer pretending otherwise. Sunita clutched Ruben's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Henrik was still covering his face. Marco and Alara turned to face their guests as husband and wife. The string quartet played them back up the aisle. Rose petals flew through the air. The setting sun painted everything in amber and gold. It was by every measure a perfect ceremony. But as Marco walked up that aisle with Alara's hand in his, he turned his head, just slightly, just for half a second, and looked toward the gate, the entrance where guests had walked in. The spot where, if everything had gone according to plan, a tall man in a navy suit and gold sneakers would have been sitting in the third row on the groom's side. The seat was empty. Marco's smile didn't flicker. He didn't let it. He was too well practiced at carrying heavy things without letting them show. He had been doing it since he was a boy behind a flower curtain. But inside, deep down in the quiet place where a boy still kept a poster on his wall, something dimmed. He's not coming, Marco thought. He turned back to Alara. He squeezed her hand. He smiled wider. It's okay, he told himself. She is enough. This is enough. Tonight is enough. And he meant it. He truly did. But during the cocktail hour that followed, while guests sipped champagne and ate crab cakes on the terrace overlooking the ocean, Marco slipped away. He found a quiet corner near the parking lot, pulled out his phone, and checked it with the desperation of a man waiting for test results from a doctor. No messages from Steph's team, no missed calls, nothing. He stared at the blank screen. The ocean wind ruffled his hair. His boutonniere was slightly crooked now. He could hear laughter drifting from the terrace, his guests, his family, his wife, all celebrating the happiest night of his life. And here he was, standing alone by a parking lot, holding a phone with no messages, feeling like a kid who had been promised something beautiful and was now slowly realizing it wasn't going to show up. A hand landed on his shoulder. Hey, man, you good? It was Tommy. Of course it was Tommy. Tommy always found him. Even in third grade, when Marco used to hide in the janitor's closet during lunch because he didn't have food and didn't want anyone to see, Tommy found him. Tommy sat with him. Tommy split his own sandwich in half without ever once making Marco feel small for needing it. Yeah, Marco said quickly. He shoved the phone in his pocket. Just getting some air. Tommy studied his face. Tommy had known Marco for 23 years. He could read that face like a book he had memorized in elementary school. You look like someone stole your dog, Tommy said. Marco almost told him. The words were right there, sitting on the tip of his tongue like birds on a wire, ready to fly. I invited Steph Curry. He said he would come. He's not here. I think he forgot about me. But Marco swallowed the words. All of them. He pushed them back down into that quiet place inside his chest, where he kept all the things that hurt too much to say out loud. Because if Steph wasn't coming, then there was no point in explaining a surprise that would never happen. It would just become a sad story. A story about a man who dared to dream too big and got exactly what he should have expected. Nothing. I'm fine, Marco said. He forced a grin. Come on, let's go back. Alara's probably looking for me. Tommy didn't believe him. That was clear from the way Tommy's eyes lingered on Marco's face for a beat too long. But Tommy also knew when not to push. That was one of the things that made Tommy the best friend Marco had ever had. He knew when to ask questions and when to just walk beside you in silence. They walked back to the terrace together, side by side. The way they had walked to the Brookfield courts 1,000 times as kids. Marco put his phone away. He straightened his boutonniere. He found Alara and kissed her on the cheek and told her she was the most beautiful woman in any room that had ever existed. The reception was about to begin. There would be dinner, speeches, dancing, cake, all the things a wedding was supposed to have. And Marco told himself, firmly, like a coach giving a halftime speech, that this was enough. This was more than enough. He had a bride who loved him, a family that sacrificed everything for him, a best friend who still split sandwiches with him after all these years. He didn't need Steph Curry. He didn't need the surprise. He didn't need the boy inside his chest to have his perfect moment. He was fine. He was fine. He kept saying it to himself as the ballroom doors opened and the golden lights spilled onto the terrace like a warm invitation. He was fine. But he wasn't. And the thing about Marco was he had spent his entire life pretending to be fine when he wasn't. He was a master at it, a professional. He had been practicing since childhood. When the other kids at school had new backpacks and his had a broken zipper held together with a safety pin, he was fine. When his friends went to summer camp and he stayed home because there was no money, he was fine. When his shoes had holes and his socks got wet and his toes went numb on the walk to school, he was fine. Marco had built an entire personality around being fine, around smiling when things hurt, around laughing louder than anyone in the room so nobody would notice the quiet parts of him that ached. But tonight, that skill was being tested like never before, because this wasn't about shoes or backpacks or summer camp. This was about something he had poured his entire heart into. A letter he had written at his kitchen table on a quiet Tuesday night in July, while the woman he loved slept in the next room, and the whole apartment was so still he could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Let's go back to that night. Let's go back to the letter. It was July 11, 2023, 3 months before the wedding. Alara was already asleep. She always fell asleep early because kindergarten teachers wake before sun. The apartment was dark except for the small yellow lamp on the kitchen table. A moth kept bumping against the bulb, making soft tapping sounds. Marco sat at the table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. He had tried to write this letter 10 times already. The trash can beside his chair was overflowing with crumpled sheets. Some had only one sentence, some had whole paragraphs. None of them felt right. He didn't want to type it. He had thought about that, opening his laptop and writing a clean, professional email, but something about that felt wrong, cold. Like sending a resume instead of opening a vein. No. This letter needed to be handwritten. It needed to have his actual fingerprints on it. It needed to feel like what it was, one human being reaching to another, with nothing but ink and hope. He picked up the pen for the 11th time. Dear Mr. Curry, he wrote. No, too formal. He crumpled it. 12th time. Dear Mr. Curry, my name is Marco Delgado Singh. I am nobody famous. I am a mechanical engineer from Oakland, California. I work at a company that makes parts for electric cars. I live in a small apartment in San Francisco with my fiance, who is a kindergarten teacher. We have a cat named Splash. Yes, I named him after your nickname, and yes, Alara thinks it's ridiculous. Marco paused. He almost smiled. Then he kept going. I'm writing to you because you changed my life. And I don't mean that in the way people say it on the internet when they comment on your highlights. I mean, you literally, actually, specifically changed my life. And I want you to know how. The words started coming faster now, like a faucet that had been stuck for weeks and finally broke open. He wrote about East Oakland, about the apartment with 3 rooms, about the pull-out couch with broken springs, about his father driving deliveries all day and cleaning offices all night, about his mother at the laundromat, folding strangers' clothes 6 days a week, smelling like fabric softener even in her sleep. He wrote about the Brookfield courts, the cracked concrete, the torn nets, the bent rims, the faded lines. He wrote about the shoes with holes, about the wet socks, about stuffing newspaper inside them at night and praying they would dry by morning. He wrote about the poster. I had one poster on my wall, just one. It was you. Number 30, Golden State Warriors. I moved 4 times growing up, and that poster came with me every single time. I rolled it up carefully and carried it in a cardboard tube like it was a sacred scroll. The edges are soft now. One corner is torn, but your face is still there, still smiling, still in the blue and gold. He wrote about watching Steph's games late at night with the volume turned down low, about copying his shooting form in the bathroom mirror, about studying how he moved without the ball, how he came off screens, how his release was so fast it looked like a magic trick. He wrote about the Curry Fours. When I was 17, I got a job bagging groceries at a corner store called Park Avenue Market on East 14th Street. The owner, Mr. Yoon, paid me 8 on 50s an hour. I worked every shift I could get. I saved every dollar for 4 months. I didn't buy anything, not a candy bar, not a soda, nothing. And when I had 141 18s, I walked into a Foot Locker and bought the Under Armour Curry 4 more dimes, gold and white. They were the first new shoes I ever owned. Everything before came from donation bins and thrift stores. I put them on in my living room behind a curtain with flowers on it that my mom hung to give me privacy because I didn't have a bedroom. And I stood up and something changed. I stood taller. I felt like I could do something with my life. Like maybe the world wasn't just a place that took things from me. Maybe it was a place that had something to give me too. You did that. Those shoes did that. But really, you did that because those shoes had your name on them. And your name meant something to me. It meant that a skinny kid from Charlotte who nobody believed in could become the greatest shooter in history. It meant hard work and faith could beat anything. It meant I didn't have to stay small. Marco's hand was cramping. He had been writing for over an hour. The moth was still tapping against the lamp. The clock said 1:47 a.m. He kept going. He wrote about college, about the scholarship to San Jose State, about studying engineering while working part-time to send money home to his parents, about graduating near the top of his class. He wrote about Alara, about the taco truck, about the spilled salsa, about falling in love with a woman who laughed louder than he did, which he hadn't thought was possible. Then he wrote the part that scared him, Mr. Curry. I'm getting married on October 14, 2023 at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, California. The ceremony starts at 6 p.m. I know this is crazy. I know you probably won't read this. I know you receive thousands of letters and that your life is unbelievably busy and that you have absolutely no reason to come to a stranger's wedding. But if there is any chance at all, that you could be there, it would be the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Not because you are famous, not because it would make a good story, but because you are the reason I believed in myself, and I want to get married knowing that the man who gave me that belief is in the room. Marco put down the pen. He read the letter from the beginning. His handwriting was messy in places. Some words were smudged where his palm had dragged across the ink. One section had a small water stain that Marco didn't want to think too hard about because it might have been a tear. It was messy and raw and imperfect. It was perfect. He signed it. With everything I have and everything I am, thank you. Marco Delgado Singh, East Oakland, California. He sealed the letter in a plain white envelope. He wrote out 2 addresses. One was for the Curry brand headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland, the company Steph had built with Under Armour. The other was for the Golden State Warriors Community Relations Department at Chase Center in San Francisco. He would send copies to both, double the odds. Like throwing up 2 shots and hoping at least one goes in. He set the letters on the kitchen counter. He turned off the lamp. The moth finally settled. He walked to the bedroom and slipped under the covers beside Alara. She stirred but didn't wake up. Her hand found his arm in the dark, instinctive, automatic, like her body knew where to find him even in sleep. Marco stared at the ceiling. He felt stupid. He felt brave. He felt both at the same time and couldn't tell which feeling was bigger. He had just invited one of the most famous athletes on the planet to his wedding, a man who had dinner with presidents, a man who had shaken hands with world leaders, a man whose net worth was estimated at over $160 million. and Marco had invited him with a handwritten letter that had a tear stain on page 2 and was sealed in an envelope that cost 39 cents. It was absurd. It was the most Marco thing he had ever done. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would mail the letters, and then he would wait, and probably hear nothing, and that would be fine. Because at least he tried. At least he took the shot. Steph would understand that metaphor. 2 weeks later, Mark was sitting at his desk at work when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. The area code was 410, Baltimore. His heart began to pound. Not the normal kind of pounding, the kind that makes your vision pulse and your mouth go dry and your hands forget how to hold things. He answered. Is this Marco Delgado Singh? The voice was female, professional, warm but businesslike, the kind of voice that made phone calls on behalf of very important people. Yes, Marco said. This is Marco. Hi, Marco. My name is Caroline. I'm calling from the Curry brand offices in Baltimore. I'm on Mr. Curry's communications team. Marco's free hand gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Mr. Curry received your letter, Caroline said. He read it personally, and he wanted me to call you directly to tell you he would be honored to attend your wedding. The phone slipped from Marco's hand. It clattered onto his desk. His coworker in the next cubicle looked over. You okay, man? Marco grabbed the phone with both hands. He pressed it against his ear. I'm sorry, he said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. High and thin and stretched tight. Can you say that again? Caroline laughed softly. Like she had made this kind of call before and knew exactly what happened on the other end. Mr. Curry will attend your wedding, Marco. He was very moved by your letter. He asked me to tell you, and this is a direct quote, tell Marco I'll be there, and tell him I remember the Curry Fours. Marco's eyes filled. He covered his mouth with his hand. He was at work, in a cubicle, surrounded by coworkers and computer screens and the quiet hum of an office building on a Wednesday afternoon, and tears were streaming down his face. Thank you, he managed. There are a few logistics we'll need to coordinate, Caroline continued. We'd like to keep this private. Mr. Curry prefers not to have advanced publicity for personal appearances. Is that something you're comfortable with? Yes, Marco said immediately. I want it to be a surprise. Nobody knows. Not even my fiancé. Perfect. We'll be in touch with details as the date gets closer. The call ended. Marco sat at his desk. The office hummed around him. Someone was microwaving popcorn in the break room. A printer was whirring. Life was going on as normal for every single person in that building. But not for Marco. For Marco, the world had just tilted on its axis. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run through the hallways and tell everyone, the receptionist, the janitor, his boss, the guy in accounting, who always heated fish in the microwave and made the whole floor smell. But he didn't. He kept the secret. He held it inside his chest like a glowing coal, warm and bright and almost too hot to hold. He carried it with him every single day for 3 months. Through the wedding planning, through the cake tastings and the seating charts and the arguments about whether the napkins should be ivory or cream. Through all of it, Marco carried this burning, beautiful secret. Steph Curry was coming to his wedding and nobody knew. But here's the part Marco didn't know. The part that would unravel everything and then put it back together in a way he never could have imagined. When Steph Curry read Marco's letter, he didn't just read it and call his assistant and say yes. That's not what happened. What happened was this. Steph read the letter in his home office in Atherton, California, one of the wealthiest towns in America, a place where the average home costs more than $10 million. He sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than everything in Marco's childhood apartment combined. He read the letter slowly from beginning to end. Then he read it again. Then he set it down on his desk and sat in silence for a long time. His wife, Ayesha Curry, the cookbook author, television personality, and entrepreneur, found him sitting there 20 minutes later. The letter was still on the desk. Steph was still quiet. What's wrong? Aisha asked. Nothing's wrong, Steph said. Read this. Aisha picked up the letter. She read it standing up, leaning against the doorframe of his office. Halfway through, she sat down. By the end, her eyes were wet. Steph, she said quietly. I know. You're going, right? Of course I'm going. Aisha set the letter down. She looked at her husband. You should do more than just show up, she said. Steph nodded slowly. He was already thinking the same thing. I want to call someone, he said. Someone who can help. He picked up his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past NBA commissioners and tech billionaires and music producers. He stopped on a name, he made the call, and with that single phone call, Steph Curry set something in motion that would hit Marco like a freight train at the reception tonight. Something Marco couldn't prepare for. Something that had nothing to do with autographs or selfies or celebrity appearances. Something that would change his family's life forever. But that moment was still hours away. And right now, at this very second, the man who set it all in motion was standing outside the gates of the Ritz-Carlton, wearing golden white sneakers, watching the California sun melt into the sea. Waiting, patiently, the way only a man who had spent his entire career being underestimated knew how to wait. But inside the Ritz-Carlton, no one was waiting. The reception was alive. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Golden lights hung from the ceiling in long, sweeping strands, hundreds of them, so that the entire room seemed to shimmer and pulse like the inside of a lantern. Each round table was draped in white linen and topped with candles in glass holders. Small arrangements of white peonies sat at every center, their petals so soft they looked like they had been carved from clouds. The walls were lined with sheer curtains that caught the candlelight and turned it warm. The floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the ballroom looked out at the Pacific Ocean, where the last bruise of purple sunset was fading into darkness. Stars were beginning to appear, first one, then three, then dozens, like someone was slowly turning up a dimmer switch in the sky. 200 guests filled the room with noise and laughter and the clinking of glasses. Waiters in black vests moved between tables carrying trays of food, grilled prawns with lemon butter, mini lamb chops with rosemary, roasted vegetable tarts that smelled like autumn. The wine was flowing, the energy was high, everyone was happy. The DJ, a man named Kofi Mensah, stood behind his booth near the dance floor. Kofi was 36 years old, originally from Accra, Ghana, and had been DJing weddings in the Bay Area for over a decade. He had a gift for reading a room, for knowing exactly when to play something smooth and slow, and when to drop a beat that would pull people out of their chairs. Right now he was playing soft R&B. Sade, Lauryn Hill, the kind of music that made people lean closer to whoever they were sitting with. Guests found their seats by following hand-calligraphed place cards that Alara had spent 3 weekends writing herself. Her handwriting was so beautiful that several guests pocketed their cards as keepsakes. At table one, the head table near the dance floor, Marco and Alara sat side by side. Their chairs were pushed close together. Alara's head rested on Marco's shoulder while she laughed at something Tommy was saying. Marco's hand was on her knee. They looked like two people who had been together for 50 years and 5 minutes at the same time. At table three, Sunita and Ruben sat with their closest family. Sunita was wearing a deep red sari embroidered with gold thread. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she had ever owned, a gift from Alara, who had secretly ordered it from a shop in Jaipur, India, 4 months before the wedding. When Sunita had opened the box that morning, she had held the fabric to her face and breathed in deeply, as if trying to inhale the love that came with it. Ruben sat beside her in a black suit that he had rented from a shop in downtown Oakland. It was the first suit he had ever worn. When he tried it on at the fitting 2 weeks ago, he stood in front of the mirror for a long time without speaking. The tailor, a patient older woman named Mrs. Feng, asked if the fit was wrong. No, Ruben said quietly. It fits. I just never thought I would wear one. Mrs. Feng smiled. You look very handsome, Mr. Delgado. Ruben looked at his reflection like he was seeing someone he didn't quite recognize. A man in a suit. A man at his son's wedding. A man who had cleaned office toilets for 20 years and was now about to sit at a table in the Ritz-Carlton. Thank you, he whispered, and it wasn't clear whether he was thanking Mrs. Feng or thanking the mirror or thanking something much larger that had no name. Tonight, Ruben sat straight in his rented suit with one arm around his wife and the other resting on the white tablecloth. His hands, thick, calloused, cracked at the knuckles from years of deliveries and cleaning chemicals, looked almost out of place on the fine linen. But nobody noticed. And even if they had, nobody would have thought less of those hands. Because those hands had carried a family. Dinner was served. The first course was a butternut squash soup with a swirl of cream on top. It came in wide white bowls that made even the soup look elegant. Sunita stared at hers for a long moment before picking up her spoon. She wasn't used to food that looked like art. Just eat it, Suni, Ruben whispered with a small smile. It's soup. It won't bite. Sunita laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and it was the kind of sound that made everyone at the table smile without knowing why. The main course followed. Guests had chosen between pan-seared salmon with dill sauce and filet mignon with roasted potatoes. Wine glasses were refilled. Bread baskets were emptied and replaced. Conversations overlapped and tangled together. Old college stories, family gossip, debates about the best restaurants in San Francisco. And then the speeches began. Alara's maid of honor, Rosalind Rosie Petrov, went first. Rosie was Alara's best friend from college, a tall woman with curly red hair and a personality so big it practically needed its own zip code. She was a veterinarian in Berkeley who specialized in exotic animals, and she started her speech with a joke about how she had once treated a parrot that wouldn't stop saying Marco Polo and how she took it as a sign from the universe. The room laughed. Then Rosie got serious. I've known Alara since freshman year at UC Davis, she said. We were roommates. And let me tell you, I saw every bad date, every heartbreak, every pint of ice cream eaten at 2 in the morning while watching terrible romantic comedies. She paused. Alara is the kindest person I have ever met. She gives everything to her students, to her friends, to her family. She gives and gives and gives. And for a long time, I worried that she would never find someone who gave back. Rosie turned to Marco. And then she called me at 2 in the morning, which with Alara is how you know something real has happened. And she said, Rosie, I'm going to marry this man. And I said, you've been on one date. And she said, I know, but I know. Rosie's voice wobbled. Marco, you give back. You match her kindness with your own. You fill her cup the way she fills everyone else's. And I have never seen my best friend so happy. So thank you. Thank you for loving her the way she deserved. Rosie raised her glass. 200 people raised theirs. Alara was crying and laughing at the same time, which made her mascara run in two perfect black lines down her cheeks, which made her laugh harder. Marco kissed her forehead and whispered something in her ear. Nobody heard what it was. That was the point. Then Tommy stood up. The room shifted. There was something different about the energy when Tommy took the microphone. Maybe it was the way he held it, not like a performer, but like a man holding something heavy. Maybe it was the look on his face, serious, almost solemn, like he was about to say something that had been sitting inside him for a very long time. Tommy didn't start with a joke. He started with silence. He just stood there, holding the microphone, looking at Marco. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The room got so quiet you could hear the candles flickering. I've known this man since we were 8 years old, Tommy finally said. His voice was steady, almost too steady, the kind of steady that comes from holding something back. We met at Brookfield Recreation Center in East Oakland. We were both terrible at basketball. A small ripple of laughter, but we played every day, every single day, rain or sun, hungry or full, happy or not. Tommy paused. And I need to tell you something about Marco, something that most of you don't know. The room went still again. Marco shifted in his chair. He didn't know what was coming. Tommy hadn't shown him the speech beforehand. They had agreed, no previews, no edits, just speak from the heart. Now Marco was regretting that agreement. When we were in the 5th grade, Tommy said there was a week, maybe it was 2 weeks, I don't remember exactly, when Marco's family couldn't afford lunch. School lunch was 2.75 cents a day, and they didn't have it. Marco's jaw tightened. He stared at the tablecloth. You know what Marco did? Tommy continued. He told everyone he was on a special diet, a health diet. He said his mom was making him do it. He said it with a big smile on his face, like it was the funniest thing in the world. He made jokes about it. He walked around the cafeteria pretending to be a nutrition expert, telling other kids their food was bad for them. Tommy's voice cracked. He made everyone laugh. Every single day. While his stomach was empty. The room was absolutely silent. Not a fork moved, not a glass clinked. 200 people held their breath. Alara reached for Marco's hand under the table. He let her take it. His knuckles were white. That's who Marco is, Tommy said, and now his voice was thick and rough and barely holding together. He carries heavy things and makes it look light. He lifts other people up even when he is sinking. He has been doing it since he was 10 years old, and I have watched him do it every single day for 23 years. Tommy turned to look directly at Marco. Bro, he said, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. You have Alara now. You have all of us. And I just need you to know you deserve everything good that happens tonight. Every single thing. Tommy's voice broke on those last two words. He pressed his lips together hard. His chin trembled. Marco stood up from his chair. He didn't say anything. He walked around the table to where Tommy was standing, and he hugged his best friend. Not a polite back-patting, 1 second man hug. A real hug. The kind where you hold on tight and close your eyes and let your body say the things your mouth can't. Tommy's boutonniere popped off and fell to the floor. Neither of them noticed. The room erupted. Not in polite applause. In something deeper. Something that came from the gut. People were clapping and crying, and a few were standing. Sunita had her face buried in a napkin. Reuben's hand was on his chest, right over his heart, pressing down like he was trying to keep something from flying out. Alara picked up Tommy's boutonniere from the floor and held it in her lap, and later she would press it inside a book and keep it forever. Marco sat back down. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He took a long drink of water. The night was beautiful. The speeches were done. Kofi transitioned smoothly from the emotional moment into something warmer, Earth, Wind, and Fire's September, and a few brave guests made their way to the dance floor. The night was moving. The joy was real, the food was perfect, and the music was right, and the room smelled like peonies and candle wax and salt water from the open windows. It was everything a wedding reception should be. But Marco kept glancing at table 12. He couldn't help it. His eyes kept drifting there. The round table near the back corner of the ballroom, close to the side entrance. It had 8 place settings. 7 of them were occupied by Alara's cousins from Minnesota, who were having a wonderful time and were already on their 3rd bottle of wine. The 8th seat was empty. No plate, no wine glass. No place card, just a chair, pushed in, with a white napkin folded on top of it like a little tent. Marco had reserved that seat 3 months ago. He had told the wedding planner, he had told Priya, that the 8th guest at table 12 would be arriving separately and preferred not to be listed on the seating chart. He hadn't explained why. Priya hadn't asked. She handled rich and famous guests all the time. Discretion was part of the job, but the seat was empty. And with every minute that passed, it became more and more clear that it was going to stay that way. Marco looked away from the table. He looked at Alara. She was dancing with Rosie now, the two of them spinning each other around like college freshmen, laughing so hard they could barely stand. He smiled. It was a real smile. But underneath it, in the quiet place where Marco kept the things he never showed, something ached. He told himself to let it go. Just let it go, Marco. The night is perfect. Your wife is dancing. Your parents are here. Tommy just gave a speech that will live inside your chest forever. What more do you need? He didn't need anything. He had everything. Almost. That word, almost, is one of the cruelest words in any language. It means you got close. It means you could see the thing you wanted. You could almost touch it, almost taste it, almost hold it in your hands, but almost also means you didn't. And Marco was living inside that word right now, smiling on the outside, aching on the inside, standing in a beautiful ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay with everything he had ever dreamed of, except the one thing he had dared to dream the biggest about. It was 9:47 p.m. The cake had been cut, a four-tier vanilla buttercream masterpiece with edible gold leaf and tiny sugar peonies that the baker, a woman named Fatima al-Rashidi from a shop in Burlingame, had spent 3 days perfecting. Alara had smashed a small piece into Marco's face during the cutting, and he had pretended to be outraged, and the guests had howled with laughter, and Fatima had watched from the back of the room with her arms crossed and a proud smile, because the cake looked beautiful even while being destroyed. The first dance was done. Marco and Alara had swayed to At Last by Etta James, a song Alara's mother, Margaret, had danced to at her own wedding in Stockholm 40 years ago. The lyrics were simple and perfect. At last, my love has come along. Marco held Alara close, and they barely moved, just rocking back and forth like two trees leaning into the same wind. The bouquet had been tossed. Rosie caught it, or more accurately, Rosie intercepted it like a middle linebacker, elbowing two of Alara's cousins out of the way with a ferocity that would have drawn a foul in any sport. She held it above her head like a trophy and shouted, "Finally!" And the room collapsed into laughter. The garter toss happened. Tommy caught it, which made everyone howl because Tommy turned bright red and tried to give it back. All the traditions were done. All the milestones were checked. The night was winding into its warm, golden final hours. Kofi had switched from crowd pleasers to slow jams. Couples were swaying on the dance floor. Old friends were deep in conversation at their tables, leaning close, talking about the kind of things people only talk about at weddings, life and time and how fast it moves and how beautiful it is. When you stop and look at it, Marco had given up. Not in a dramatic way, not with a sigh or a speech. He just quietly, privately, gently released the hope he had been carrying for 3 months. He let it go the way you let go of a balloon. You don't throw it away. You just open your hand and watch it float upward until it disappears. It's okay, he told himself. He believed it now. Or at least he was close to believing it. The night is perfect. Alara is my wife. That's all that matters. He was standing near the bar in the corner of the ballroom, talking with his cousin Ines. Ines was 27, a graduate student at Stanford studying marine biology, and she was telling Marco about a species of jellyfish that was technically immortal. It could reverse its own aging process and start its life cycle over from the beginning. So it just goes backward, Marco asked. Basically, yes. When it gets old or sick, it transforms back into its youngest form. It gets a second chance, over and over, forever. That's amazing. It's called Turritopsis dorni, the immortal jellyfish. I need to tell Alara about this. She's going to want one for the classroom. They were both laughing when Davi Okafor appeared. Davi, the assistant. The same young man who had watched Priya turn away the most famous basketball player in the world 5 hours earlier and had been quietly losing his mind about it ever since. Davi looked like he hadn't slept in a year. His bow tie was crooked. His eyes were wide. His hands were clasped in front of him like he was about to deliver a sermon or a confession, and he wasn't sure which one. "Excuse me," Davi said. His voice was careful and controlled, like a man walking across a frozen lake. "Mr. Delgado, sing?" "Just Marco," Marco said with a smile. "I've told you 3 times tonight, Davy." Marco. Davy swallowed. There's someone at the side entrance, asking for you. He says you invited him." Marco's hand froze around his glass. The cocktail, a whiskey sour that the bartender had made too strong, suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The noise of the room seemed to pull away from him, like someone had turned down the volume on the entire world. "He says I invited him?" Marco repeated. "Yes, sir. He's been waiting outside for a while, actually." Marco's heart did something strange. It didn't speed up. It stopped. For one full second, it just stopped, like a clock between ticks, and then it slammed back to life so hard he felt it in his teeth. "He's wearing sneakers," Davy added quietly. His face was the color of old parchment, gold and white sneakers. Our planner, Miss Anand, she turned him away earlier, during the ceremony. Before I realized who he was, Davi's voice got smaller. "I just found out about an hour ago. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I'm so sorry, Marco. I am so sorry." She didn't know. Neither of us knew. Marco didn't hear the apology. He didn't hear the last 4 sentences at all. His brain had gotten stuck, completely, totally, irreversibly stuck, on one phrase: gold and white sneakers, curry fours, he's here. The glass slipped from Marco's hand. It didn't shatter. It landed on the thick carpet with a dull thud, the whiskey sour soaking into the fibers in a dark circle that nobody would notice until tomorrow. Marco was already moving. Not walking, running. He ran through the ballroom, past the dance floor, where couples swayed and didn't see him. Past Tommy, who called out, "Yo, where are you going?" and got no answer. Past the kitchen doors, where a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes had to spin sideways to avoid a collision. Past a hallway lined with paintings of ocean scenes in heavy gold frames. Past a service door with a sign that said staff only. He hit the push bar on the door and burst into the California night. The air was cool and smelled like salt and eucalyptus. The sky was full of stars. The sound of the ocean was close, that constant, breathing rhythm of waves folding over themselves in the dark. And there, standing in the soft glow of a pathway light, leaning against a stone wall with his hands in his pockets and his ankles crossed like a man who had absolutely nowhere else to be, was Wardell Stephen Curry at 2. Steph Curry, number 30, four-time NBA champion, two-time most valuable player. The man who changed basketball forever with a shot that starts in his fingertips and ends in the hearts of millions. The man who broke the all-time three-point record on December 14, 2021, at Madison Square Garden in New York City, launching a shot from 28 feet that swished through the net and shattered Ray Allen's record of 2,973 career three-pointers. The arena erupted. Steph pulled off his mouthguard and raised his arms, and the entire basketball world paused to acknowledge that they were watching the greatest shooter who had ever lived. The man on the poster above the pull-out couch, the poster above the cot behind the flower curtain, the poster that had traveled in a cardboard tube through 4 apartments and a childhood that never had enough of anything except hope. That man was standing 10 feet away from Marco, wearing a navy blue suit and golden white Curry 4 more dimes. Steph saw Marco come through the door. He straightened up from the wall. He smiled that same warm, easy, unhurried smile that he had given Priya 5 hours ago. The smile that said, "I'm not in a rush. I'm not angry. I'm just here." "Hey, Marco," Steph said. His voice was calm, friendly, like they had known each other for years. "Sorry I'm late," he added. He glanced down at his sneakers and let out a soft laugh. "I got kicked out earlier." Marco didn't move. He stood in the doorway with his hand still on the push bar and his mouth slightly open and his eyes doing something he couldn't control. They were filling up, not slowly, not gradually once, like a dam that had been holding for 3 months had just cracked straight down the middle. He couldn't speak. He tried. He opened his mouth, he pulled in air, but his throat had closed around the words like a fist and nothing came out. Not a sound. Not a syllable. Steph's smile softened. He had seen this before, the look on someone's face when a dream they had given up on suddenly walks back into the room. He recognized it because he had felt it himself after every injury, after every comeback, after every moment the world told him he was too small, too slow, too fragile, and he proved them wrong. He knew what it looked like when someone couldn't believe what they were seeing. Steph stepped forward. He closed the distance between them. And he did the simplest, most human thing in the world. He hugged Marco. Not a celebrity hug, not a side hug with a pat, a real hug, arms all the way around, firm, steady, the kind of hug that says, "I see you, I know your story, you're not invisible." Marco broke, his face crumbled, his shoulders shook. His hands came up and grabbed the back of Steph's suit jacket and held on tight. "The way a drowning man holds onto something solid," he cried. Not politely, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old and unfinished. The kind that sounds like a boy, not a man. The kind that has been waiting behind a flower curtain for 14 years. Steph held on. He didn't pull away. He didn't pat Marco's back or say, "It's okay," or try to rush the moment. He just stood there in a quiet hallway behind a ballroom, under a sky full of stars, and let a man he had never met before cry against his shoulder. Because Steph understood. He understood that this wasn't about celebrity. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about basketball. It was about a boy who had nothing and who had pinned all of his believing on a poster on a wall. A boy who had used that poster like a lighthouse, like a fixed point in the dark, something to aim toward when everything else was shifting and uncertain and hard. And now the lighthouse was here, in person, hugging him, wearing the shoes. "You came," Marco finally whispered. His voice was wrecked, shredded, barely a voice at all. "Of course I came," Steph said. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like there was never any question. "Your letter meant the world to me, man. I wouldn't miss this." Marco pulled back. He wiped his face with both hands. His tuxedo sleeves were soaked. His eyes were swollen. He looked like a man who had just survived something enormous. He looked down. The sneakers. The Curry 4 more dimes, gold and white, catching the pathway light and gleaming against the dark stone. Marco laughed. It came out broken and wet and beautiful, half sob, half a laugh. The sound of a heart that was too full to decide which emotion to release first. "The shoes," Marco said. Steph grinned. He lifted one foot and turned it slightly, like a model showing off a product. "You wrote about them," Steph said. "You told me what they meant to you, so I wore them. It felt right." Marco shook his head, not in disagreement, in disbelief, the kind of headshake that says, "This cannot be real. This cannot be my life." "I thought you weren't coming," Marco said. "I thought when you didn't show up for the ceremony, I thought you changed your mind, or that something came up, or that maybe you just—" He stopped himself. He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the words that maybe you just forgot about me. Because that was the real fear, the deep one, the one that lived under all the other fears, the fear that he was forgettable, that his letter was one of thousands, that his story wasn't special enough to remember. Steph read it on his face. He didn't need Marco to finish the sentence. "Marco," Steph said, "I showed up at 5:45, right on time. Your wedding planner stopped me at the gate." He pointed down at the sneakers again. "These got me kicked out." Marco's mouth fell open. Priya turned you away? She was doing her job. Black tie dress code. No sneakers. She was very professional about it." Steph laughed. "I wasn't going to pull the 'do you know who I am' card. That's not me. You've been out here this whole time? I went and sat in my car for a while. Had some really good trail mix. Listened to a podcast. Then I came back and found a guy on your Davi and told him who I was. He almost passed out." Marco laughed again, the real kind this time, loud and full and messy. "Priya is going to die," Marco said. "She's going to have a great story to tell at her next wedding," Steph said. They stood there for a moment, just the two of them. The ocean breathing in the dark, the muffled bass of Kofi's music coming through the walls, stars above them like scattered salt on black velvet. And Marco felt it again, that thing he had felt at 17. Standing behind a flower curtain, wearing brand new shoes, he stood a little taller, and then Marco grabbed Steph's arm, not politely, not gently. He grabbed it the way a kid grabs his best friend's sleeve on Christmas morning and drags him downstairs to see the tree. Pure excitement, pure urgency, zero dignity. "Come on," Marco said. "You have to come inside." Steph laughed and stumbled forward a step. "Whoa, hold on. Shouldn't we warn people? I don't want to cause a—" "No," Marco said. He was already pulling Steph toward the service door. "No warnings, no announcements, nothing. Marco, I have been keeping this secret for 3 months. 3 months, Steph. Do you know what it's like to keep a secret for 3 months from a kindergarten teacher? Those people are trained to detect lies. Alara once caught a 5-year-old lying about eating glue from across the room. Across the room. And I have been hiding this from her since July." Steph was laughing hard now. The kind of laugh that comes from your belly and makes your shoulders bounce. "So no," Marco continued, still pulling him down the hallway. "We are not warning anyone. We are walking through those doors, and I am going to have the greatest moment of my life, and everyone in that room is going to lose their minds, and I have earned this." "Fair enough," Steph said, grinning. "Lead the way." They reached the entrance to the ballroom. The double doors were closed. Through the wood, Marco could hear Kofi playing Stevie Wonder's "Signed, Sealed, Delivered." He could hear laughter. He could hear the clink of glasses and the hum of 200 happy people, his family, his friends, his wife. None of them had any idea what was about to walk through that door. Marco paused. He looked at Steph. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. But they carried the weight of 14 years of cracked courts and torn nets and newspaper stuffed in wet shoes, of a poster on a wall and a letter at a kitchen table and a phone call from Baltimore that changed everything. 2 words. A lifetime inside them. Steph nodded. He understood. "Let's go," Steph said. Marco pushed open the doors. The ballroom was in full swing. The dance floor was packed. Tommy was doing a move that could only be described as aggressive interpretive dance. Rosie was leading a conga line of Alara's Minnesota cousins. Sunita was clapping along to the music from her seat, slightly offbeat, in a way that was completely endearing. Ruben was watching his wife clap and smiling the quiet, private smile of a man who had spent 30 years falling in love with the same woman. Alara was on the dance floor with her mother, Margit. They were holding hands and spinning each other around the way they used to in their kitchen in Daly City when Alara was 6 years old and Margit would play ABBA records and they would dance until the neighbors complained. Nobody noticed Marco walk in. Nobody noticed the tall man behind him. Marco moved quickly through the crowd to the DJ booth. He leaned over the table and whispered into Kofi's ear. Kofi froze. His hand hovered above the mixer. His eyes, brown and wide and suddenly enormous, slid past Marco to the man standing behind him. Kofi's jaw dropped, literally dropped. His mouth hung open for a full 3 seconds. Then he snapped back. He was a professional. He had a job to do. He cut the music. The sudden silence hit the room like a wave. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dancers froze mid-step. Tommy was caught in a pose that looked vaguely like a flamingo and would haunt him in photographs for the rest of his life. 200 faces turned toward the DJ booth. Marco took the microphone. His hand was trembling. The microphone picked up the shake, a soft, rhythmic thudding sound like a heartbeat broadcast through speakers. "Everybody," Marco said. His voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat. "I need to tell you all something." The room was perfectly still. You could hear the ocean through the open windows. You could hear the candle flames whispering on the tables. You could hear 200 people breathing. "When I was a kid," Marco began, "I had nothing." He paused, not for effect. because the words were heavy and he needed a moment to carry them. We didn't have much money. We didn't have a big house. We didn't take vacations. My dad worked 2 jobs. My mom worked 6 days a week. I slept on a pull-out couch and later on a cot behind a curtain. Sunita's hand found Ruben's under the table. She squeezed. He squeezed back. But I had a poster on my wall, Marco continued. One poster. Just one. And every night I would look at that poster and I would think, if he can do it, maybe I can do it too. If a skinny kid from Charlotte who nobody believed in can become the greatest shooter in basketball history, then maybe a kid from East Oakland with holes in his shoes can become something too. Marco's eyes swept across the room. Every face was locked on his. That poster kept me going. Through the hard days, through the hungry days, through the days when I wanted to quit, I looked at that man's face and I kept going. He paused again. Tonight, Marco said, and now his voice was shaking so badly the words came out in pieces. The man on that poster is here. In this room, a murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turned, eyes searched. Wearing sneakers, Marco added, and then he turned and pointed to the side entrance. Steph Curry stepped into the light. For 1 second, one single, frozen, crystallized second, nothing happened. The room held its breath. 200 brains tried to process what their eyes were seeing. The circuit between recognition and reaction was jammed, overloaded, like a computer trying to open too many windows at once. And then the room detonated. There is no other word for it. It detonated. Screams, not polite gasps. Screams. The kind of sound a room makes when reality breaks open and something impossible falls through the crack. Chairs scraped backward. People leaped to their feet. Hands flew to mouths. Champagne glasses were abandoned on tables with such force that several tipped over, sending golden rivers across the white linen. Tommy's flamingo pose collapsed entirely, and he grabbed the person nearest to him, one of Alara's cousins from Minnesota, a woman named Greta, who he had never spoken to before, and shook her by the shoulders while yelling, "Is that Steph Curry? Is that Steph Curry?" Greta, who did not follow basketball and had no idea what was happening, yelled back, "I don't know, was that is, but everyone is screaming, so I'm screaming too." Rosie dropped the bouquet she had fought so hard to catch. It landed in someone's soup. Marco's uncle, a large man named Devraj, who had been quietly sleeping in his chair for the past 40 minutes, jolted awake and knocked over an entire bottle of Merlot. He would not realize this until the next morning when he found his rented pants stained red from the knee down. But the reactions that mattered, the ones that would live in Marco's memory forever, were quieter. Sunita dropped her glass. It hit the table and shattered. A shard nicked her finger and a small dot of blood appeared on her skin, but she didn't feel it. She didn't feel anything except the impossible weight of what she was seeing. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide and wet. Her hand, the one not bleeding, was pressed flat against her chest. She looked at Marco, then at Steph, then back at Marco, and she understood. She understood that her son, her boy, the baby she had rocked to sleep in a 3-room apartment, while her hands were still raw from a day of folding strangers' laundry, had written a letter, had reached out across the impossible distance between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one, and had been answered. Reuben stood up slowly. He didn't scream. He didn't gasp. He placed one hand over his heart, his calloused, cracked, delivery truck steering, office floor scrubbing hand, and pressed it against his chest. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He might have been praying. He might have been saying his son's name. It was impossible to tell, and it didn't matter, because whatever he was saying was between him and something sacred. But the best reaction, the one that broke Marco wide open, the one that made the title of this story true, was Alara's. Alara was still on the dance floor when Steph walked in. She was standing next to her mother, their hands still linked from their last spin. When the screaming started, Alara turned toward the entrance. She saw the tall man in the navy suit. She saw the golden sneakers. She didn't recognize him at first. Alara didn't watch basketball. She couldn't name a single player on the Golden State Warriors. She once asked Marco if a free throw meant the ball was free, and Marco had to leave the room because he was laughing too hard to breathe. So when she saw Steph Curry, she didn't see a 4-time NBA champion. She saw her husband's face. That was what she looked at, not the celebrity, not the sneakers. She looked at Marco, standing by the DJ booth with a microphone in his trembling hand and tears running down his face and his whole childhood pouring out of him like light through a cracked door. And she understood, not the basketball, not the records or the championships or the three-point shots. She understood what this man meant to the boy Marco used to be. She understood that somewhere inside her husband, this confident, smiling, successful engineer who wore nice suits and drove a clean car and never talked about the hard years, there was still a kid, on a cot behind a flower curtain, staring at a poster, whispering to himself, maybe, maybe someday. And someday was tonight. Alara's face did something that Marco would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. It didn't crumble, it didn't break, it opened like a window swinging wide. Every wall she had, every composure, every polite social smile, it all fell away. And what was underneath was raw and pure, and so full of love it was almost too bright to look at. "You did this?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the noise of the room. but Marco heard it. Across a packed dance floor, through the screaming and the chaos and the crashing of overturned wine glasses, he heard her. I wrote him a letter, Marco said. Alara crossed the dance floor. She didn't walk. She didn't run. She moved like someone in a dream, steady and sure and inevitable, like a river finding the sea. She reached Marco. She put both hands on his face. She looked into his eyes, red and swollen and leaking and absolutely beautiful, and she kissed him. Not the way she had kissed him at the altar. That kiss had been joyful and public and celebratory. This kiss was different. This kiss said, I see you, all of you, the parts you show and the parts you hide, the man in the tuxedo and the boy behind the curtain. I see every version of you, and I love them all. Then she wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face into his neck and sobbed. They stood in the middle of the dance floor, holding each other, while 200 people screamed around them, and Steph Curry stood at the edge of the room, smiling. Just smiling, not posing, not performing, not being a celebrity, just being a man who had shown up in sneakers, because a letter from a stranger had reminded him why any of it mattered. The room eventually calmed down. Not quickly. It took a solid 5 minutes before the volume dropped from rocket launch to extremely excited dinner party. People swarmed Steph. Of course they did. He was Steph Curry at a wedding in sneakers. But Steph was gracious with every single person, every handshake, every selfie, every stammered, "Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you." He was patient and kind and present in a way that made each person feel like they were the only one in the room. He signed napkins. He signed a menu. He signed Tommy's forearm, and Tommy immediately announced he was getting it tattooed, and Marco said, please don't, and Tommy said, too late, the decision has been made. Steph danced with Sunita. He took her hand and led her onto the dance floor, and they swayed together while Kofi played something slow and sweet. Sunita came up to Steph's chest. She looked up at him with eyes that held 30 years of laundromat shifts and fabric softener and sacrifice. Thank you for coming, she said in her soft voice. You made my son believe he could be something. Steph looked down at her, and for the first time all night, his eyes glistened. Your son, Steph said quietly, is already something. You made sure of that. Sunita closed her eyes. She leaned her head against Steph's chest, and they danced. He shot imaginary three-pointers with Marco's little nieces, Kavya and Preeti, who were 7 and 5 years old and who had no idea who Steph was but thought he was very tall and very fun. Kavya asked him if he played in the WNBA. Steph said that was the highest compliment he had ever received. He took a photo with Ruben, just the two of them. Ruben stood stiffly beside Steph, unsure what to do with his hands until Steph put an arm around his shoulder and said, Smile, Mr. Delgado. Your son just had the best wedding in history. And Ruben smiled, a real smile, the kind that decades of exhaustion had almost made him forget he was capable of. Priya found Steph during a quiet moment near the bar. She looked like a woman who had been through several emotional revolutions in the span of 5 hours. Her clipboard was gone. Her earpiece was gone. Her hair, which had been in a perfect bun at the start of the evening, was now coming undone in soft wisps around her face. Mr. Curry, she said, I am the person who turned you away at the gate. I need you to know I did not recognize you, and I am so deeply embarrassed that I don't think I will ever fully recover. Steph put a hand on her shoulder. You were doing your job, he said. The dress code said no sneakers. I was wearing sneakers. That's on me. And honestly, Steph said, he tilted his head and gave her that smile. It makes the story better. Every good story needs a moment where things go wrong. You gave us that moment. This story wouldn't be the same without you. Priya stared at him. Her lower lip trembled. Then she laughed. A wet, hiccuping, overwhelmed laugh. Then she cried. Then she laughed again. I turned away Steph Curry, she said, shaking her head. I'm putting that on my business card. Steph laughed. Priya nodded. She enforces the dress code for everyone, even NBA champions. They were both still laughing when Davi appeared with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Priya and one to Steph. I feel like we all need this, Davy said. They clinked glasses. And for a moment, just a brief shimmering moment in a night already overflowing with them, a wedding planner, her assistant, and one of the greatest athletes in the world stood together at a bar in Half Moon Bay, drinking champagne, laughing at the absurdity and beauty of how the evening had unfolded. It was the kind of night that doesn't feel real, the kind you have to keep touching, like a bruise, just to make sure it actually happened. But it wasn't over yet, because there was still one more thing. The thing Steph had set in motion months ago, after reading Marco's letter. The thing that started with a phone call from his home office in Atherton. The thing his wife Aisha had looked him in the eye and said, you should do more than just show up. That thing was still coming, and it was going to bring the room to its knees. It was 10:30 p.m. The ballroom had settled into a warm, buzzing glow. The initial shock of Steph's arrival had melted into something softer, a sustained, low-grade amazement that hummed through every conversation, every whisper, every sidelong glance at the tall man in sneakers who was currently teaching Tommy how to do a proper follow-through on a jump shot using a balled-up napkin and a champagne bucket. Tommy missed the buckets 17 times. Steph made it on his first try. That's not fair, Tommy said. Practice, Steph said, grinning. The night felt complete, more than complete. It felt like the kind of night that would become family legend, the story told at every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every future wedding for the next 50 years. The night Steph Curry showed up. The night the groom cried in a hallway. The night Priya kicked out an NBA champion. Marco felt full. Not the food kind of full, although the filet mignon had been excellent. The soul kind of full. The kind where your chest is so packed with gratitude and joy and disbelief that you can't take a deep breath because there's simply no room left inside you. He thought it was over. He thought the surprise was Steph. That was the gift, the presents, the hug in the hallway, the shoes, the dancing, all of it. That was the ending of the story. He was wrong. Steph walked over to the DJ booth. He said something to Kofi. Kofi nodded and handed him the microphone. The music faded. 200 people turned. When Steph Curry picks up a microphone at your wedding, you stop whatever you're doing. You could be mid-bite on the best piece of cake you've ever tasted. You put the fork down, you turn around, you listen. Steph stood in the center of the dance floor. The golden lights above him cast soft shadows across his face. He held the microphone loosely, comfortably, the way he held everything, like it belonged in his hand. First of all, he said, and his voice filled the room without effort, congratulations to Marco and Alara. This is one of the most beautiful weddings I've ever been to. And I've been to a lot of weddings, applause. Also, he added, glancing down at his feet, I'm sorry about the sneakers. The room erupted in laughter. Priya, standing near the back with Davi, covered her face with both hands. Steph waited for the laughter to settle. Then his face changed. The playfulness dimmed. Something deeper rose to the surface, something serious and real and steady. But I need to be honest with everyone, Steph said. I didn't just come here tonight because of Marco's letter. I mean, the letter is what got me here. It's what made me say yes, but it's also what made me want to do more than just show up. The room went quiet. I've been playing basketball professionally since 2009, Steph continued. That's 14 years. In that time, I've won championships. I've broken records. I've done things on a basketball court that I dreamed about as a kid in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm grateful for all of it. He paused. But every once in a while, not often, but sometimes, something reminds me why any of it matters, why the game matters, why the shoes matter, why standing on that court in front of 20,000 people and making a shot matters. He looked at Marco. Marco's letter did that for me. Marco was standing near table 1 beside Alara. Her hand was in his grip was so tight, her knuckles had gone white, but she didn't pull. She just held on. Marco wrote me about growing up in East Oakland, Steph said. He told me about his father driving a delivery truck all day and cleaning offices all night. He told me about his mother working at a laundromat 6 days a week. He told me about sleeping on a pull-out couch with broken springs, about shooting baskets on cracked courts in shoes with holes in them. Sunita's head dropped. She stared at her lap. Ruben's hand found the back of her neck gently, the way you touch something precious, and stayed there. And he told me about buying his first pair of real basketball shoes, Steph continued. The Curry Fours, gold and white. He saved every dollar from a grocery store job for 4 months, $141.18, every penny earned, every penny counted. Steph's voice was steady, but there was a weight in it now, a gravity that pulled the room in closer. And he said something in that letter that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, when I put those shoes on, I stood a little taller. And I thought about that. I thought about what it means when a kid who has nothing puts on a pair of shoes and suddenly feels like he's somebody. Steph looked out at the room. That's not about sneakers. That's not about basketball. That's about belief. It's about a kid looking at someone who came from somewhere small and made it somewhere big and thinking, maybe I can do that too. He paused. And that's why I play. That's why any of us play. Not for the trophies, not for the records, not for the contracts or the commercials or the highlight reels. We play for the kid watching at home who needs to believe that his life can be bigger than his circumstances. The room was absolutely still. 200 people sat motionless. The candles flickered. The ocean breathed outside the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a wave broke against the rocks with a sound like a sigh. Marco is that kid? Steph said. And he grew up. And he worked his way through college. And he became an engineer. And tonight he married the woman he loves. And he did it all of it, starting from a place where most people would have given up. Steph reached into the inside pocket of his navy blue suit jacket. He pulled out an envelope. It was white, simple, unremarkable, the kind of envelope you could buy at any office supply store for 19 cents. But the room reacted to it like it was made of dynamite, because there was something about the way Steph held it, carefully, deliberately, with both hands, the way you hold something that matters more than the material it's made of. When I read Marco's letter, Steph said, I showed it to someone, a friend of mine. Someone who runs a foundation that helps families in situations like the one Marco grew up in. And that person, after reading Marco's words, wanted to do something. Steph walked across the dance floor. The crowd parted for him without being asked. People stepped back, pulled in chairs, cleared a path instinctive, automatic, like the room itself was making way for whatever was about to happen. He stopped in front of Marco. They stood face to face, the same height, both 6'2", eye to eye, the man on the poster and the boy who had stared at it. Steph held out the envelope. "This is for you," he said. Marco looked at it. His name was written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. Neat, precise letters. Blue ink on white paper. Marco Delgado Singh. Marco didn't take it right away. He stared at it. His eyes moved from the envelope to Steph's face and back to the envelope, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that kept rearranging itself. "Open it," Steph said gently. Marco took the envelope. His hands were trembling, visibly, violently trembling, the way hands tremble when the body understands something before the brain does. When the body knows that whatever is inside this envelope is going to change something fundamental and irreversible. Alara stood beside him. She pressed her shoulder against his arm, not to see the letter, just to be close, just to be touching him when whatever was coming arrived. Marco slid his finger under the flap. He tore it open. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Heavy stock, cream-colored, the kind of paper that important things are written on, the kind that has weight and texture and a faint watermark when you hold it up to the light. He unfolded it. He began to read. The room watched his face. That's all they could do. They couldn't see the words. They couldn't read the letter from their seats and their spots on the dance floor. All they could do was watch Marco's face and try to understand what was happening by the way his features moved. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second. A small crease appeared between his eyebrows, the kind that comes from concentration, from trying to process words that don't immediately make sense because they're too big to fit inside your understanding. Then his eyes reached the middle of the page, and his face changed. It didn't crumble the way it had in the hallway. It didn't open the way Alara's had on the dance floor. It emptied. Every expression left his face at once. His eyes went wide and blank. His mouth fell open. The crease between his eyebrows vanished. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning, still standing, still breathing, but temporarily vacated from his own body. His knees buckled. Not a stumble, not a sway. His knees simply stopped working, the way a shelf gives way when you put one too many books on it. His legs folded and he began to go down. Tommy was there. Of course Tommy was there. 23 years of catching Marco in cafeterias, on basketball courts, in the quiet hallways of a shared childhood had given Tommy a reflex as automatic as breathing. He lunged forward and caught Marco under the arms before he hit the floor. "I got you," Tommy said. "I got you, bro. I got you." Marco didn't respond. He was still reading. His eyes were still on the page, even as his legs refused to hold him. Tommy held him up, and Marco kept reading, and the room held its collective breath so hard that it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the building. Alara put her hand on the small of Marco's back. She could feel him shaking. Not his hands this time, his whole body, every muscle, every bone, vibrating like a tuning fork struck against something enormous. "Marco," she whispered. "What does it say?" Marco couldn't answer. Steph stepped closer. "Read it out loud," Steph said softly. Marco looked up from the letter. His face was wet. His eyes were red and overflowing. He looked at Steph with an expression that was beyond gratitude, beyond shock, beyond any single emotion that has a name. It was the look of a man who had just discovered that the universe was paying attention, that all the heavy things he had carried, all the rice and beans dinners and the shut-off electricity and the shoes with holes and the cot behind the curtain and the years and years and years of not enough had been seen, had been witnessed, had been weighed by someone, somewhere, and found worthy of an answer. He looked back at the letter. He held it up with both hands. Tommy was still supporting him. Alara was still touching his back. 200 people leaned forward in their chairs. Marco read. His voice broke on every other word. It came out in fragments, cracked and shattered and reassembled syllable by syllable like a man building a bridge while trying to walk across it. "Dear Marco," he stopped, swallowed, continued. My name is not important, but your story is." His chest heaved. "Mr. Curry shared your letter with our foundation. We have reviewed your background, your achievements, your journey from East Oakland to where you stand today." His voice was disintegrating. Alara squeezed his arm. Tommy tightened his grip. "It is our honor to inform you." He stopped. He pressed the letter against his chest. He couldn't continue. He tried. He opened his mouth. He pulled in a ragged breath, but the words were too heavy. They were sitting in his throat like stones, beautiful, impossible stones that he couldn't lift. "I can't," he whispered. "Steph, I can't." Steph reached out and gently took the letter from Marco's hands. He held it up. He looked at Marco with eyes that were glistening now, too. "Can I?" Steph asked. Marco nodded. Steph read. His voice, steady, warm, the voice of a man who had spoken in front of millions, filled the ballroom. "It is our honor to inform you that your parents' mortgage, the home they purchased last year at 4714 Bancroft Avenue, Oakland, California, has been paid in full." Steph lowered the letter. The room didn't erupt. It collapsed. That's the only word for what happened. The room collapsed inward on itself like a star-going supernova. The explosion wasn't outward, it was inward. 200 people fell into themselves at the same time. There was a sound. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't cheering. It was something the human voice makes when shock and sorrow and joy and disbelief all collide at once, a sound that lives somewhere between a gasp and a sob, between a prayer and a cry. It rose from every table, from every corner, from the kitchen staff standing in the doorway and the bartender with his hands frozen around a cocktail shaker and Kofi behind the DJ booth with tears falling silently down his cheeks. 200 people were crying at the same time. Not politely, not dabbing at their eyes with napkins. Crying, the real kind. The ugly, shoulder shaking, mascara destroying, unable to breathe kind. But the sound that cut through all of it, the sound that Marco would hear in his dreams for the rest of his life, came from table 3. It came from Sunita. It was not a word. It was not a name. It was a sound that existed before language, before vowels and consonants and grammar. It was the sound a mother makes when the weight she has been carrying for 30 years is suddenly, impossibly, lifted off her shoulders. She collapsed into Reuben, not gracefully, not gently. She fell sideways into her husband's body like a building that had finally exhausted its ability to stand. Her red sari bunched around her. Her gold bangles clattered against each other. Her face, that face that had smiled through 25 years of folding strangers' laundry, crumpled like paper. And Reuben caught her. Of course he caught her. The way he had caught everything, every bill, every late shift, every exhausted morning, every sacrifice, every silent prayer for 30 years. He caught her and he held her and he buried his face in her hair. And Ruben Delgado, a man who had worked 2 jobs for 3 decades without ever once complaining, without ever once asking why things had to be so hard, without ever once letting his son see him, break wept. Not quiet tears, not a dignified sniffle. He wept. The sound came from somewhere ancient inside him. Somewhere below the calloused hands and the aching back and the suit he had rented because he had never owned one. It came from the place where he kept every hour of every night shift. Every floor he had mopped, every toilet he had scrubbed, every morning he had dragged himself out of bed at 4 a.m., knowing he wouldn't get back to it until midnight. All of it, every exhausted, invisible, uncelebrated hour, came pouring out of him in that ballroom. The house, their house. The one they had finally been able to buy last year after decades of renting. A small house on Bancroft Avenue in Oakland. Nothing fancy, 3 bedrooms. A yard with patchy grass and a lemon tree that didn't produce lemons, a garage that didn't quite close all the way, but it was theirs. Or at least, it was supposed to be theirs in 27 more years, when the mortgage was paid off. 27 more years of monthly payments. 27 more years of Ruben driving trucks and Sunita folding clothes. 27 more years of careful math at the kitchen table. This much for the mortgage, this much for groceries, this much for electricity, this much left over, which was almost always close to nothing. And now it was paid. All of it. Every dollar. Every cent. Every one of those 27 remaining years erased, wiped clean. The paperwork was already done. The foundation had handled everything. The house on Bancroft Avenue, with its patchy yard and its broken garage and its lemon tree, belonged to Ruben and Sunita Delgado, free and clear. No more monthly payments. No more careful math. No more lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if they could make it work. It was theirs, really, truly, permanently theirs. And they found out at their son's wedding, surrounded by their family, in a ballroom by the ocean, while a man they had only ever seen on a poster stood in front of them wearing golden sneakers and reading a letter that changed everything. Marco looked at Steph. His face was destroyed, swollen and red and soaked and absolutely wrecked. He looked like a man who had been pulled from the sea, gasping, disoriented, alive in a way he hadn't been 5 minutes ago. Why? Marco whispered. It was the only word he could find, the smallest, simplest question, but it held everything, all the disbelief, all the gratitude, all the shock, all the years. Why me? Why my family? Why us? Steph's eyes were wet now too, not in the polished camera-ready way that celebrities sometimes tear up at public events. Wet in the real way, the human way. The way that happens when something genuine reaches the part of you that fame and money and championships can't touch. Because you reminded me where I come from, Steph said. His voice was thick. Akron, Charlotte, small beginnings. Everybody's got a version of that story. Everybody started somewhere small. He looked at Sunita and Ruben. Sunita was still folded into Ruben's chest. Ruben's eyes were closed. Tears were sliding down the creases of his face. And because your parents gave everything, Steph said. Everything. So you could stand right here in this room tonight. They gave their backs, their hands, their sleep, their years. They gave pieces of themselves that they will never get back. Steph's voice cracked. They deserve to rest, he said. They deserve to wake up tomorrow morning and know that the roof over their heads is theirs, that nobody can take it, that they don't owe anything to anyone. They earned it 1,000 times over. They earned it. Steph set the letter down on the nearest table. Your parents carried you, Marco, he said. Now let someone carry them. The room hung suspended. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for their drink or checked their phone or shifted in their seat. 200 people sat perfectly still, pinned to the moment like butterflies under glass. The only sounds were the soft, ragged breathing of people who had just finished crying, and the ocean, always the ocean, rolling and folding outside the windows like the Earth's own heartbeat. Marco stood in the center of the dance floor. The letter was on the table. Steph had stepped back. Alara was beside him, her hand still on his back, her mascara long gone, her face bare and swollen, and more beautiful than it had been all night, because everything artificial had been stripped away, and only the real thing was left. Tommy was still holding Marco's arm. He hadn't let go. He would not let go until Marco told him to. For a long time, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe an hour, Marco didn't move. He stood in the golden light of that ballroom and he breathed. That was all. He just breathed. And then he did something that nobody expected. He didn't go to Alara, he didn't go to Steph, he didn't pick up the microphone or make a speech or fall to his knees. He walked to table 3, slowly, one step at a time. His legs were still unsteady. Tommy hovered behind him for the first few steps, arms out, ready to catch, but Marco waved him off gently without looking back. He reached the table. He stood in front of his mother. Sunita looked up at him. Her face was a landscape of everything she had ever been. A young bride at a courthouse with no dress and no flowers. A new mother in a 3-room apartment, a woman at a laundromat, folding and pressing and smiling. A woman who ironed a flower curtain and hung it on a tension rod so her son could have something that felt like privacy. A woman who called his name from 3 blocks away when the streetlights came on, and whose voice echoed off the buildings like a song he would hear for the rest of his life. All of it was on her face, every year, every sacrifice, every morning she woke up before dawn and didn't complain. Her sari was wrinkled from all the hugging and the crying and the collapsing into Reuben. Her makeup was gone. Not smeared, not smudged, gone. Completely erased as if it had never existed. The red bindi on her forehead was slightly off-center. The small cut on her finger from the broken glass was still bleeding, a tiny red dot she hadn't noticed and wouldn't notice until tomorrow morning. She looked up at her son, and she looked so small. That was the thing that broke Marco's heart the most. How small she was. 5'1", 110 pounds. This tiny, mighty woman who had carried a family on her shoulders for 30 years, she was so small. Had she always been this small? Or had Marco just gotten taller? Or had the years quietly compressed her, pressing down on her frame the way gravity presses down on everything, slowly, patiently, until what was once tall becomes small and what was once young becomes old? Marco held out his hand. Dance with me, Ma, he said. Sunita shook her head. It was an instinctive response, automatic defensive, the reflex of a woman who had spent her whole life staying in the background, folding, pressing, supporting, never standing in the center, never taking up space. I don't dance, she said. Her voice was hoarse from crying. You know that, Beta. I have never danced. Tonight you do, Marco said. His hand was still extended, steady. Patient, he wasn't going to pull it back. Sunita looked at his hand, then she looked at Reuben. Reuben's eyes were red and swollen, but he nodded, a single firm nod. Go. Sunita looked back at Marco. She put her hand in his. It was so light. Her hand weighed nothing. Her fingers were thin and rough and warm, and they curled around Marco's palm the way they had curled around his entire body 31 years ago in a hospital room when he was 6 pounds and 11 ounces and the whole world was new. Marco led her to the center of the dance floor. 200 people watched. Not one of them made a sound. Even the candles seemed to hold still. Kofi, behind the DJ booth, wiped his face with his sleeve. His hands were shaking. He had cried more tonight than he had cried in the last 10 years combined, but he had a job to do. He was the DJ. This moment needed a song. He could have played something grand, something sweeping and cinematic, a song that would match the enormity of what was happening. But Kofi understood something about this moment that a lesser DJ would have missed. This moment didn't need to be big. It needed to be small. Small the way Susanita was small. Quiet the way Ruben's love was quiet. Gentle the way Marco's hand was gentle when he held his mother's fingers. Kofi pressed play. Whitney Houston's voice filled the ballroom. If I should stay, I would only be in your way. I will always love you. But not the part everyone knows. Not the explosive, soaring, belt it from your gut part that plays at karaoke bars and talent shows. The beginning, the quiet part. The part that sounds like a whisper, like a lullaby sung at bedtime. Like a mother humming to a baby on a pull-out couch while the city breathes outside the window. Marco put one hand on his mother's back. Sunita put one hand on his shoulder. She had to reach up, way up, because her son was more than a foot taller than her. Her arm was almost fully extended, like a child reaching for a shelf that's too high. They began to sway. There were no fancy moves, no spins or dips or choreographed steps, just swaying side to side, slow and gentle, like two people standing on a boat that's rocking softly in a harbor. Sunita's head reached Marco's chest. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his sternum. She could hear his heartbeat through his tuxedo, strong and steady and real. The same heartbeat she had heard on an ultrasound machine 31 years ago, when she was 23 years old and scared and didn't know how she was going to afford diapers, but knew, somehow, with a certainty that had no logic behind it, that everything was going to be okay. She closed her eyes. Marco rested his chin on top of her head. Her hair smelled like jasmine. It always smelled like jasmine, even through the fabric softener. Even through 30 years. Jasmine, they swayed, Whitney sang, and 200 people sat in the ruins of their composure and watched a man dance with a woman who had given him everything. Nobody took photos. Later, this would seem remarkable. In a room full of people with smartphones, not a single person reached for their pocket, not because someone told them not to, but because the moment was so sacred, so fragile, and so enormous at the same time, that photographing it felt like a violation, like trying to put the ocean in a jar. Some things are meant to be seen only once, held only in memory, kept in the soft, imperfect place inside your chest where the most important moments live. This was one of those things. The song played, the mother and son swayed, the room wept silently, and then halfway through the song, someone stood up at table 3. Reuben, he rose slowly, like a man who had just put down something very heavy and wasn't sure his legs would hold. His rented suit was wrinkled. His tie was crooked. His face was a map of tears and time and a kind of dignity that doesn't come from money or status, but from endurance, from showing up every single day for 30 years and doing what needed to be done without ever asking for applause. He walked to the dance floor. His steps were uneven. Reuben had never been graceful. His body's built for labor, not movement, thick and square and permanently tilted slightly to the right from decades of carrying heavy boxes out of delivery trucks. He walked the way he did everything, without elegance, without flair, but with an unstoppable, grinding determination that had carried his family through every storm. He reached Marco and Sunita. He tapped his son's shoulder. Marco looked up. His eyes were closed. He opened them, and he saw his father standing on a dance floor for the first time in his life in a rented suit, with tears still drying on his face. "Can I cut in?" Reuben asked. His voice was rough. Sandpaper on stone. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years talking to dispatch radios and vacuum cleaners in empty hallways. But underneath the roughness, buried so deep you had to listen with your whole body to hear it, there was a tenderness, so vast it could fill the ocean outside the window. Marco stepped back. He let go of his mother's hand. Reuben took it. And for the first time in their married life, for the first time in 33 years of marriage, Reuben and Sunita Delgado danced together. They had never had a wedding reception. Marco knew this. He had heard this story many times. His parents had gotten married at a courthouse in Oakland on a Tuesday afternoon in 1990. Sunita wore a yellow dress she had borrowed from a friend. Reuben wore khaki pants and a button-down shirt. There were no flowers, no music, no cake. No guests except Reuben's brother, who served as a witness and had to leave early because he had a shift at the cannery. They signed the papers. The clerk pronounced them married. They walked out of the courthouse and took a bus home. That night, Sunita cooked rice and dal, and they ate dinner on the floor of their first apartment because they didn't have a table yet. There was no first dance. There was never supposed to be a first dance. But tonight, in a ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay, 33 years after that Tuesday at the courthouse, Reuben and Sunita got their dance. Reuben didn't know how to dance. He held Sunita the way he held everything, with too much grip and not enough finesse. His hand on her back was stiff. His feet moved in a pattern that bore no relationship to the rhythm of the music. He stepped on her toes twice in the first 30 seconds. None of it mattered. Sunita looked up at her husband, and she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave customers at the laundromat. Not the brave smile she wore when the bills were late and the electricity was off, and she told Marco, "It's fine, Beta, we're fine." A real smile, the kind that starts somewhere behind the eyes and spreads outward until it reaches every part of the face. The kind that contains an entire lifetime of love and exhaustion and perseverance and forgiveness and stubbornness and faith. She smiled at Reuben. And Reuben, who had forgotten what his own smile looked like, smiled back. They swayed, offbeat, off balance, perfectly imperfect. Whitney sang the last quiet notes. The song was ending. The lullaby was fading. But Kofi didn't let it end. He started it over. From the beginning, the quiet part, the whisper part. "If I should stay, I would only be in your way." And Rubens and Sunita kept dancing. Alara found Marco. He was standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching his parents. His hands were at his sides. His tuxedo was ruined, stained with tears and wrinkled beyond repair. His eyes were swollen almost shut, but his face was peaceful. For the first time all night, maybe for the first time in years, Marco's face held no tension, no hidden weight, no secret kept, no boy behind a curtain pretending everything was fine. He was just watching his parents dance, and he was at peace. Alara slipped her hand into his. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside him and watched. After a moment, Marco spoke. "They never had a reception," he said quietly. "Did I ever tell you that? They got married at a courthouse. No flowers, no music, no dance." "You told me," Alara said. "They're having it now," Marco said. 33 years later, in a ballroom, with the ocean outside. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder. "They deserve it," she said. "They deserve everything," Marco whispered. On the dance floor, Sunita's head was against Reuben's chest. Her eyes were closed. His eyes were closed. They were not in the Ritz-Carlton anymore. They were not at their son's wedding. They were not in California. They were on a bus in 1990, riding home from a courthouse, sitting side by side, their hands quietly intertwined between the seats. Young, broke, and scared and married, not knowing what was coming, not knowing about the three-room apartments and the double shifts and the broken springs and the flower curtains and the son who would grow up to stand in a room full of people and say, they gave everything. They were just two people on a bus going home together, and now, 33 years later, they were still together, still going home, still holding on. The song played. They danced. And in the back of the room, far from the dance floor, far from the cameras that no one was holding, far from the tears and the noise and the light, Steph Curry stood alone. He had his phone out. He was recording, not for content, not for engagement, not for likes or shares or followers or brand strategy. He was recording because some things deserve to be remembered. And he trusted himself to remember why. Later, the next day, he would post a short clip to his Instagram story, just 6 seconds, no faces, no names. Just a blurred image of two figures swaying on a dance floor, silhouetted against golden light. The audio was muffled. The image was grainy. You couldn't tell who they were. The caption read, "This is what it's all about." No hashtags, no tags, no location pin, just those 7 words. It would get 14 million views in 48 hours. People in the comments would speculate. Who are they? Where was this? What happened? Steph would never answer. Some stories are not meant to be explained. They are meant to be felt. But in that moment, standing in the back of that ballroom with his phone in his hand and his curry fours on his feet, Steph wasn't thinking about Instagram. He wasn't thinking about views or comments or algorithms. He was thinking about Charlotte, North Carolina, about a small apartment where a skinny kid with a jumpy release used to shoot baskets into a toy hoop on his bedroom door. He was thinking about his own mother, Sonia Curry, about the meals she made, the prayers she said, the games she never missed. He was thinking about the distance between where you start and where you end up, and about how that distance is never traveled alone. He lowered his phone, he put it in his pocket, and he watched Ruben and Sunita dance. The wedding ended at midnight. Guests trickled out slowly, the way people leave a place they don't want to leave. Hugs lasted longer than usual. Goodbyes were said 2 and 3 times. People stood in the parking lot under the stars, talking in small groups, not ready to let the night end. Not ready to return to the ordinary world after spending an evening inside something that felt like a miracle. Steph left quietly. He shook Marco's hand at the door and then pulled him into one last hug. He hugged Alara. He hugged Sunita for a long time. He shook Ruben's hand with both of his own, wrapping his palms around Ruben's callous fingers and holding on him for an extra beat. Take care of each other, Steph said. Then he walked into the night. Navy suit, golden white sneakers, alone. His car was parked on a side street a block away because he hadn't wanted to draw attention when he arrived. He drove home to Atherton in the dark. The Pacific Coast Highway was empty. The ocean was invisible, but he could hear it through his open window, that constant, ancient breathing sound. He thought about Marco's letter the entire drive. 3 days later, a package arrived at Marco and Alara's apartment. It came by courier, no return address, just a plain brown box with Marco's name on it. Alara was at school. Marco was working from home. He carried the box to the kitchen table, the same table where he had written the letter 5 months ago, under the same yellow lamp, while the same moth probably bumped against the same bulb somewhere outside the window. He opened the box. Inside was a shoebox. He recognized the logo immediately. Under Armor, the Curry brand. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper like a newborn in a blanket, was a brand new pair of Under Armour Curry 4, more dimes, gold and white, size 11, Marco's size. He stared at them. His vision blurred. He blinked and 2 tears fell onto the tissue paper, darkening the white in 2 small circles. There was a note. It was tucked inside the left shoe, folded in half. Marco pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was loose and slanted and confident. The handwriting of someone who signed autographs 10,000 times a year, but had taken the time to write this one slowly. Marco, these are for you. Not to play in, not to wear, just to keep. Every time you look at them, I want you to remember something. Not me, not basketball, not this night. I want you to remember the kid who saved 141.18 bagging groceries at a corner store. The kid who carried a poster in a cardboard tube through 4 apartments. The kid who stood behind a flower curtain and put on a pair of shoes and stood a little taller. That kid made it, Marco. He made it, and he didn't make it because of me. He made it because of Ruben and Sunita, because of the laundromat and the delivery truck and the floors that got mopped at midnight, because 2 people decided that their son's future mattered more than their own comfort. And they held that line every single day for 30 years. You don't owe me anything, but if you want to pay it forward, tell your kids the story, all of it, the hard parts and the good parts, the holes in the shoes and the gold ones in the box. Tell them that where you start doesn't decide where you end up. Tell them that believing in yourself is not a feeling, it's a choice you make every morning when you get out of bed. Keep shooting. SC 30 PS. Tell your wedding planner I'm sorry about the sneakers, but I'd do it again. Marco read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it back inside the left shoe. He placed the shoes on the shelf in the living room, right next to a framed photograph from the wedding, the one Tommy had taken on his phone at the exact moment Steph walked into the ballroom. In the photo, you can't see Steph. The camera was pointed at Marco's face, and Marco's face, mouth open, eyes flooding, every wall stripped away, was the most honest thing Tommy had ever captured. The shoes in the photo sat side by side on the shelf, gold and white next to a silver frame. Every morning, Marco's routine was the same. He woke up, he made coffee in the small kitchen. He walked to the living room while the coffee was still too hot to drink, and he stood in front of the shelf. He didn't touch the shoes. He didn't open the box. He just looked at them. Some mornings it was a glance, a breath, a nod. Some mornings it was longer. Some mornings he stood there until his coffee went cold, and Alara had to call from the bedroom. "You're looking at the shoes again," she would say. "I'm not looking at the shoes," he would answer. "Then what are you looking at?" Marco would take a sip of his cold coffee. He would look at the gold and white sneakers that a 17-year-old boy had saved 4 months to buy. He would look at the photograph of his own face. At the moment, his childhood came full circle. "I'm remembering who I was when I first put them on," he would say. Alara would lean against the door frame. She would watch her husband standing in front of a shelf, in his pajamas, holding a mug of cold coffee, looking at a pair of shoes he would never wear. And she would think about how strange and beautiful it was that a whole life could fit inside a pair of sneakers, that a whole childhood could live on a shelf, that a man could look at a box of golden white leather and fabric and see not shoes, but a map of everywhere he'd been and everyone who had carried him there. She never rushed him. She never told him the coffee was cold. She just let him stand there for as long as he needed, because she understood. On Bancroft Avenue in Oakland, a small house sat at the end of a quiet street. It had 3 bedrooms, a yard with patchy grass, a lemon tree that had, against all odds and all botanical expectations, started producing lemons last spring. Small ones, sour ones, but lemons nonetheless. Sunita picked them every Sunday morning. She made lemonade with too much sugar and not enough ice. Reuben told her it was the best lemonade he had ever tasted. He said this every single Sunday, and every single Sunday Sunita swatted his arm and told him he was a terrible liar. But she smiled when she said it. There was no mortgage payment due, no envelope from the bank, no careful math at the kitchen table on the first of the month. The house was theirs, the lemon tree was theirs. The patchy yard and the garage that didn't close all the way, theirs. Reuben still drove the delivery truck during the day, but he had quit the night job. For the first time in 30 years, he was home every evening. He sat on the porch and watched the sky change colors. He read the newspaper, the actual paper kind, because he didn't trust the internet. He fell asleep in his chair, and Sunita covered him with a blanket and let him sleep. He was resting. After 30 years, he was finally resting. Sunita still worked at the laundromat, but only 3 days a week now, not 6. The other 4 days, she tended the yard. She planted marigolds along the walkway. She grew cilantro and mint in small pots on the porch railing. She called Marco every evening at exactly 7:15 p.m. and asked him if he had eaten, even though he was 31 years old and fully capable of feeding himself. "Yes, Ma. I ate. What did you eat? Pasta. Just pasta? No vegetables?" "Marco, there were vegetables in the pasta." "What vegetables?" And Marco would lean against his kitchen counter and close his eyes and listen to his mother worry about him from 30 miles away. And he would smile, because her worry was not a burden. It was proof that he was loved. It had always been proof. And somewhere across the bay, in the Chase Center, under the lights, in front of 18,000 screaming fans, Steph Curry was warming up for another game. He dribbled the ball between his legs, crossed over, pulled up from 35 feet, 5 feet beyond the three-point line, a distance that would be laughable for any other human being on earth. He released the ball. It arched through the air, spinning, silent, perfect. Nothing but net. The crowd roared. Steph jogged back on defense. He popped his mouthguard in. He clapped his hands once. He didn't celebrate. He had made that shot 10,000 times. It was not extraordinary to him. It was just what he did. But he knew, somewhere in the back of his mind, in the quiet place where championships and records didn't matter, that in a small apartment in San Francisco, a pair of gold and white sneakers sat on a shelf that, every morning, a man stood in front of them and remembered who he used to be. That on Bancroft Avenue, a woman was picking lemons from a tree in a yard she owned. That a man was sleeping on his own porch for the first time in 30 years. He knew. Maybe he thought about it when he laced up his shoes before each game. Maybe he thought about it when the lights went down and the starting lineups were announced and the arena shook with noise. Maybe in the half second between the moment the ball left his fingertips and the moment it reached the net, a flash of gold and white sneakers crossed his mind. Or maybe he didn't think about it at all. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe the whole point, the whole beautiful, impossible, unlikely point, was that it didn't matter whether Steph remembered. What mattered was that Marco did. What mattered was that a boy from East Oakland with holes in his shoes had looked at a poster on a wall and decided to believe, had decided that his life could be bigger than his apartment, bigger than his circumstances, bigger than every voice inside his head and outside of it that told him to stay small. He chose to believe, and that belief, stubborn, irrational, held together with nothing but hope and a pair of golden white sneakers. It carried him all the way here, to a life he had built with his own hands, to a wife who let him stare at shoes every morning without rushing him, to parents who were finally resting, to a shelf in a living room where a pair of sneakers and a photograph sat side by side, glowing softly in the morning light, holding an entire story inside them. A story about a boy who stood a little taller and never stopped. And that is the power of one letter, one pair of sneakers, and one man who never forgot where he came from. Now, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city and your country in the comments. I read every single one, and it blows my mind how far these stories travel. If this story made you feel something, if it gave you chills or put a lump in your throat, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Not for me. For the kid out there right now who is sleeping on a pull-out couch with a poster on his wall, wondering if his life can be bigger than his circumstances. Every like and every share pushes this video to one more person who needs to hear it. That is how we spread kindness. Not with money, not with fame, just by passing the story along. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss another story like this one. Now click on the video on your screen right now, because that story might be the one that changes your whole day.